It must be one of the most amazing flying stories of all time. One that is still hard to believe. An airliner full of passengers out of control at 17,000 feet. And the pilot is stuck outside the plane. In the cockpit, 3 frightened flight attendants are clinging to his legs. If he slips from their grasp, the captain's body could be sucked into the engine and bring down the plane. At the controls, a young co-pilot is battling to get the plane to the nearest airport.
Mayday! 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 London, Sweden 5390!
The lives of 87 passengers and crew hang by a thread.
A lot of people go through life thinking it'll never happen to me. But you tend to go through life thinking it can.
I said I thought I was going to die, Mother. I thought I was going to die.
This bizarre accident tested the limits of human survival. And the investigation that followed not only exposed the mistakes behind it, but led to new ways of preventing them. For the crew of the British Airways flight from Birmingham, England to Malaga, Spain, the 10th of June began like any other day. Old friends about to do a job they loved.
Yeah, God, I can't remember that though.
Yeah, but I'm not doing it when I go.
Stewards Nigel Ogden and Simon Rogers, along with stewardess Sue Prince, had worked together on and off for years.
Anyway.
They're an experienced, capable team that takes pride in its work.
At Birmingham, all the cabin crew and all the pilots, they all knew each other. We're all on first-name terms. Simon was a good friend of mine anyway, because we, you know, just go out for a beer or a curry or whatever like that. Everybody was friendly to everybody else.
The one new member of the group was Alistair Atchison, an experienced co-pilot he'd just driven down from Manchester that morning.
Did you get up to anything special?
Morning, Alistair. Come on in.
Tim Lancaster is captain. He's been a commercial pilot for 21 years.
Well, we'd better get started, eh?
Chief Steward John Heward arrives to give the crew their final briefing.
Morning, everyone.
Right. Is that the first officer? Yeah, just down from Manchester.
Nice seeing you face. Okay. Malaga. Right, looking forward to this. Right, Nige, you can sit up with me up front and talk rugby. Sue, where would you like?
Over the wing?
Okay, so, Simon, you're at the rear. All right, now, just a few safety questions. Nigel.
Before takeoff, the co-pilot performs a walk-around, checking the outside of the aircraft for anything wrong. In the cockpit, Captain Tim Lancaster reviews a log of the maintenance carried out on the plane the day before.
Everything okay?
Fine.
She's just come out of maintenance by the look of it. Hardly much there. Just changed the windscreen.
Many of the passengers know the flight well and are looking forward to a relaxed trip to Spain.
I was going to catch a plane from Birmingham to Malaga to meet my mum. My sister and I were joining her there for a week's holiday, a girls' week.
I live in the south of Spain, and 2 or 3 times a year I come back to see my grandchildren and also my mother. Everyone lives near Birmingham, so that's the route I normally take, Malaga, Birmingham.
These unsuspecting passengers and crew were about to begin an adventure of a lifetime.
Seem to have made yourself comfortable.
Too right.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. My name is Tim Lancaster. Welcome aboard this British Airways flight to Malaga. Unfortunately,
He seemed laid back and quite jovial, really. You know, sort of a, well, it's a lovely day in Malaga, blue skies, sunshine. Sit back and enjoy the flight.
Sunny, and we still expect to get you there on time. Birmingham Tower, Speedbird 5390. We're ready to start and push.
Speedbird 5390. Clear to start and push.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to take you through our
Safety procedures and equipment. As this information is for your benefit, we ask you to watch and listen carefully.
Clear to start engines.
Starting number 2.
Emergency exits are on both sides.
The stewardess and shows you the emergency exit and all the emergency gear. And, of course, nobody's really watching. One chap was quite blasé, he was reading the Times, and people weren't really bothering because we've all been on flights and, you know, it's no big deal.
The air can be topped up by using the mouthpiece, and there is a whistle for attracting attention.
knots.
The BAC 111 was known as the Jeep of the skies, a workhorse that was easy to maintain and had a good safety record. At 43 tons, this pressurized hull is carrying 81 passengers and 6 crew, and is now climbing to 23,000 feet. In just over 2 hours, they should be in Spain. Only a catastrophic accident could bring this plane out of the skies.
Alistair, I can see my house from here.
2 minutes into the climb, the pilots switch on the autopilot. Tim Lancaster takes off his shoulder straps and relaxes into the flight.
Now I went into the flight deck to ask Tim and Alistair what they would like to drink.
You gentlemen like a tea?
Please, the usual.
Milk, 1 sugar, please.
And I said, your breakfast's on. It'll only be a few minutes.
Now, almost 13 minutes after takeoff, and at 17,300 feet, they're just 5,000 feet from their assigned altitude. But then, in a split second, everything changes. With a huge explosion, the captain's windscreen blows out into the sky. Almost immediately, a white fog forms.
A sort of really intense stomach, body-shaking thud.
We were just diving, really. And then we started to judder like this.
And I was a bit stunned. I thought, oh God, it's a bomb.
Alistair, the co-pilot, is suddenly fighting for control in a 350-mile-an-hour wind. There's no time to think about the captain, who's been blasted out of the window by pressurized air escaping from the aircraft. The rushing wind pins Captain Lancaster to the roof of the cockpit. Inside, his legs have jammed the control column forward, disconnecting the autopilot and pushing the plane down into a dive. Alistair Acheson needs all his flying experience now. He's on his own. The captain's body is pinned to the outside of the jet as it hurtles down from 17,000 feet. The throttles are jammed forward, increasing the speed to nearly 400 miles an hour. Co-pilot Alistair Acheson has to take command. While he fights to bring the plane under control, steward Nigel Ogden can see his captain is being sucked out of the aircraft.
And I looked in, the flight deck door was resting on the controls, and all I could see was Tim out the window. I jumped over, put one foot in the captain's footwell, and the other one was down the side of his seat. I just grabbed him before he went out completely.
Nigel Ogden holds on to the captain for dear life. Outside, a 390-mile-an-hour blast of wind at minus 17 degrees centigrade smashes into Tim Lancaster's body. The tornado in the cockpit is giving Acheson major problems. Air traffic control can hear his cries for help, but the storm rushing through the cockpit drowns out their replies. The captain's feet are still pushing against the control column, and Alistair is struggling to get full control of the plane. He's now diving through some of the busiest air lanes in the world, with the added danger of a mid-air collision. From the cabin, lead steward John Heward sees the chaos in the cockpit and does what he can to help.
I looked up, and there was Nigel sort of hanging across the seat in the flight deck. In front of me, the flight deck door had fallen forwards and trapped itself between the actual door frame and the throttles of the aircraft. So I literally stamped on it twice, and it literally broke into 3 or 4 pieces. Behind, on the wall of the flight deck, there is a spare seat for anybody to observe the flight or whatever. And I thought, well, if I put my arm through the seatbelt there, I can grab both of them, and at least we've got some sort of anchor point inside the aircraft.
Alistair, who's never flown with this crew before, has to leave them to their own devices and focus on getting the plane to safety. He now has control of the throttles. John and Nigel have wrenched the captain's feet away from the control column. But instead of slowing down, Acheson decides to continue the rapid descent. It will quickly take him out of the way of any other air traffic and take him to a lower altitude where oxygen equipment won't be needed. Staying too long at a high altitude risks oxygen starvation, and this older aircraft is not fully equipped with oxygen for all the passengers on board. The airspeed indicator goes into the red. In the cabin, the 2 other stewards, Sue Prince and Simon Rogers, are trying to prepare the passengers for what they hope will, at worst, be an emergency landing. They've dived to 11,000 feet in just 2.5 minutes. But as they level out and slow down to 170 miles per hour, the captain's body is no longer pinned to the roof and slides round to the side of the plane.
Flight level 100. Radar heading 195.
Working his way from the back of the cabin, steward Simon Rogers now catches sight of the chaos in the cockpit for the first time.
Now the aircraft had got to sort of flying fairly level, Simon came up from the back. Nigel was beginning to get really sort of achy now with his arms, and I knew he wasn't going to let go unless he was sure that Tim wouldn't fly out of the window.
We all had fear in our eyes. We were all worried sick because we thought, you know, either Tim's going to die or we're going to die, you know. That was going through my mind. But it was up to Alistair then, and it was up to us 3, Simon and John and myself, to hold on to grim death.
Mayday, mayday, mayday.
All I remember is Tim's arms flailing out. His arms seemed about 6 foot long. And I'll never forget that. His eyes were wide open. I mean, his face was hitting the side of the side screen, but he didn't blink. And I thought to myself, and I said to John, I said, I think he's dead. I think he's dead. And I said, you and Sil have to hold on. I can't hold on anymore. I can't hold on anymore. I've lost the feeling in my arms.
We decided to put Simon. I said to Simon, you sit in that jump seat and fasten yourself in. With Simon sitting in the seat, we'd freed Tim's legs from between the control column and the seat. So we hooked his feet over the back of the captain's seat, and then Simon literally put his hands on the top, just so he was holding his ankles down.
Hey, look, what's going on? We're gonna be all right. But I think the captain's dead.
Well, I couldn't believe it, because he just told us what a lovely day it was. You know, blue skies, sunshine, relax and enjoy the flight. And then next minute, he's dead.
Simon and Alistair now face one of their most difficult decisions: what to do with the lifeless body of the captain. No words are said, but for a moment the thought passes between them that the best thing would simply be to let it go.
No! Can you hold on to it, please?
But Alistair's order isn't simply an act of compassion.
Releasing the body at the position it was in, it would have gone close to the upper area of the wing. It could have damaged the leading edge of the wing. Had it gone over the wing, it could very well have gone into the engine. Quite a lot of damage could have been caused by the release of the body. So I think it was a very sensible decision to try and keep him where he was.
Alistair has managed to get down to 11,000 feet. Without the captain to help, he's operating the plane's systems from memory and shepherding it around Heathrow, some of the most congested airspace in the world. 7 minutes out of contact with the ground, he's able to hear the voice of air traffic control for the first time.
Requesting radar assistance onto the nearest airfield, please.
Speedbird 5390, roger. Can you accept landing at Southampton?
Speedbird 5390, I am familiar with Gatwick. Would appreciate Gatwick.
Alistair wants to land at Gatwick Airport, as he's flown there many times before. But Southampton is nearer, and even though he's never flown there before, he knows he has to get down fast.
And I am on 150 knots. Requesting radar assistance into Southampton.
When you're going to an airport that you're not used to, you normally have charts, let-down plates, that kind of thing that you can read up on and learn something of the airport you're going to. But he knew nothing of Southampton. He hadn't been there. He had no charts because everything had gone out the window. There was no let-down plates to look at the approach and so on.
All the maps and charts blew out of the window with the captain, and only the air traffic controller can guide Acheson. He turns towards Southampton.
Southampton, this is Speedbird 5390. Do you read?
Speedbird 5390. Good morning.
Identified on handover from London radar 6 miles west of Southampton
Airfield. What is your passing level?
Roger, sir. I am not familiar with Southampton. Request you shepherd me onto the runway.
When he spoke, he was obviously stressed. It sounded as if he was under a fair bit of pressure.
What is your number of persons on board?
We have 84 passengers on board, and I think that will be all until we are on the ground.
Roger, that's copied. I've been advised it's pressurisation failure. Is that the only problem?
Negative. The captain is half out of the aeroplane, I understand. I believe he's dead.
Roger, that is copied.
My feeling was, when he told me what was going on, it was one of disbelief, because it doesn't actually happen. You know, it's one of these things that you see in films, that happens in films, but it doesn't happen in real life. And it was sort of the hairs in the back of the neck go up, and there's this feeling down the spine, the tingle down the spine, and you think, no, it's not for real, but it's got to be.
Flight attendant holding on to him, but requesting emergency facility for the captain. I think he is dead.
Affirm. What is your passing level?
Leaving flight level 5,500 feet on 1019.
Roger, that's copied. I'll give you a little bit more space, then I'll turn you on to a heading of 180. Yeah, it's a full emergency. It's a 111.
Rundle contacts the emergency services at the first opportunity.
I don't know how many people are on board, but I'll let you know.
Could you confirm that the length of runway at Southampton is acceptable for a 111?
Yes, it is acceptable
for a 111, and I'll give you the figures shortly.
As long as we have at least 2,500 metres, I am happy.
I'm afraid we don't have 2,500 metres. Neither do Bournemouth. We have a maximum of 1,800 metres.
Atchison is concerned that the plane is above its maximum landing weight, being full of fuel for the journey to Malaga. And the BAC-111 can't dump fuel. If the runway isn't long enough, he faces more problems.
Whether the aircraft could actually stop on the runway, or whether the tyres would burst, or whether he would go off the end of the runway. That's obviously what he was worried about when asking for 2,200 metres.
5390. Thank you very much. We are 3 greens and flaps 45. So we are set for approach, but make it please very gentle.
Yes, I will indeed. You are number 1 traffic.
If you think about it, all the airline pilot training is done with 2 pilots, both compass mentors in the cockpit, one flying the aeroplane and the other one doing all the emergency drills. So what you actually had was the captain hanging out the window, at least one person hanging onto his legs, and Alistair flying the aeroplane with nobody else to talk to.
Speedbird of 5390 is 9 miles from touchdown. You're clear to land. Wind indicates 020 degrees at 14 knots. Descend to height to 1500 feet. QFE is 1017.
Roger, sir. Descending to 1,500 feet. Talk me down all the way. I need all the help I can get.
Roger, you'll be able to stop the aircraft on the runway and evacuate the aircraft on the runway.
He must have been about 6 or 7 miles from touchdown. And obviously at that point I kept talking until he was happy he could see the runway and was happy to continue looking out the window and land the aeroplane. At the point he said he was visual with the runway, I effectively stopped talking.
Not acknowledge unless requested. It will be an uninterrupted talk down, but feel free to interrupt if you feel you need to.
5390. Thank you very much. I have the runway in sight.
Thank you. You are clear to land. Do you wish me to continue with any further information?
Negative.
"32 minutes after takeoff, with 81 terrified passengers, a nearly full fuel tank, and the captain blasted out of the window, Alistair Atchison attempts the most difficult landing of his career. At 8:55 a.m., flight BA-5390 makes a perfect landing at Southampton Airport. Immediately, emergency vehicles surround the plane. Firefighters remove the body of the captain and lead the passengers and crew away.
I remember seeing the co-pilot, the man who really, if it wasn't for him, we'd have been on the other side by now, and is walking down the runway very slowly, shaking his head, and he got an ambulance man walking with him with his arm around the shoulders of the co-pilot. And the co-pilot was shaking his head as if... I remember that distinctly. I don't know why, but I do.
Alistair Atchison has carried out a remarkable piece of flying, almost unprecedented in aviation history. He has had to pilot his plane without his captain, who has undergone physical stresses that nobody could have been expected to survive.
I think these extreme conditions, no one expects to occur in their lifetime. His survival time must have been measured in no more than tens of minutes as he became colder and colder and his body systems began to shut down.
Tim Lancaster's body was subjected to a two-pronged assault. The physical violence that his body suffered being blown out of the plane, and the extreme cold and lack of oxygen at 17,000 feet. Every 1,000 feet of altitude causes the temperature to drop by 2 degrees centigrade. So the temperature on the outside of the plane would have been around minus 17 degrees centigrade. The extreme wind chill also meant his body was losing heat very rapidly.
He would have lapsed into semi-consciousness and then unconsciousness, and as the temperature, his core body temperature fell, he would have finally died as a result of the excessive cold in that environment.
Despite the trauma that Captain Lancaster's body suffered, there was one final twist to his story.
You know, it's only once I've ever been here, and that was 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
In the Oxfordshire countryside, John Heward and Nigel Ogden are visiting one of their crew members who shared their horrific experiences.
Here he is.
Hi, guys. John, how are you? Nice to see you.
Nice to see you, mate.
Nige. Oh. Come in. Hi.
Like on SEP, when you go in, you've got to pretend...
The captain of that fateful flight, Tim Lancaster, somehow survived his horrific ordeal. There were no fatalities on BA 5390.
Yeah, that's it now. You can go on the 3-day cruise across there.
As his frozen, lifeless body was removed from the plane, nobody thought that Tim could have survived such punishment. But remarkably, he was slowly beginning to emerge from his horrific adventure.
Tim, can you hear me?
I regained some consciousness on the ground at Southampton because I remember big red and white things, which were obviously fire engines and ambulances, not people and not conversation. And then my next clear, lucid thoughts were in hospital in Southampton. Over the next few days, all the bits eventually arrived back in my sort of consciousness, and I put the jigsaw together and, you know, sort of played the whole story for myself and understood what had happened. There was a big bang, a noise of all the air escaping, but I remember watching the windscreen move away from the aircraft, and then it had gone like a bullet. It disappeared into the distance. And I think there was an even bigger bang, or there was an even bigger bang. And I was very conscious of going upwards. And, well, the whole thing became completely surreal then, as it would. And I was aware of being outside of the airplane, but that really didn't bother me a great deal. What I remember most clearly is the fact I couldn't breathe because I was facing into the airflow. And I turned it round and actually turned my body round. I was sort of looking back along the top of the aircraft at that stage, and I could breathe then. And yes, I remember that. I can remember seeing the tail of the aircraft. I can remember the engines going round, and then I don't remember much more. Memory stopped at that point.
I went down there last year, but they've changed the airport totally now.
I'm glad I did hold on, because Tim was alive. I mean, he's a very strong man. He must have been, to survive that. I wouldn't have been able to survive it.
That's all very dramatic.
It is, look.
Tim Lancaster's survival was little short of miraculous. He'd been minutes away from death. It was Alistair Acheson's flying that saved his life. His quick thinking in getting the plane to the ground in only 22 minutes saved Lancaster from dying from the effects of exposure. And by pure chance, the physical trauma he suffered was limited. It included a bone fracture in his right arm and wrist, a broken left thumb, bruising, frostbite and shock. Remarkably, within 5 months, Tim Lancaster had made a full recovery and was flying again.
Reaper 539.
Of course, the captain wasn't the only one to go through a horrific experience. Battling with the controls whilst a tornado raged through the cockpit was something no commercial pilot could be trained for.
If it goes comfortable at all, just let me know.
The few pilots who are able to understand the experience of Acheson and his crew include these young Royal Air Force trainees.
Officer Shapley, seat 7. Flying Officer Bolton, seat 3.
They are being put through a simulation of an explosive decompression in this hyperbaric chamber. It duplicates the effects of a window blowing out at 25,000 feet.
Individual intercoms.
Checked and operated.
All connections.
Checked and firm.
Console checks are complete. Clear to claim instruction of the medical officer.
Climbing to 8,000 feet at 4,000 feet per minute.
The atmospheric pressure is initially set to 8,000 feet. This is the pressure inside the sealed cabin of most commercial aircraft. Anyone can survive this for many hours with no ill effects. Any higher than that, and the experience is very different.
Is enabled.
Students, listen in. Will all students please indicate with a clear thumbs up that they are ready for rapid decompression? 8 thumbs, rest your thumbs. Students, stand by for rapid decompression. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, now.
The mist in the hyperbaric chamber is identical to the fog formed when the window blew out on BA 5390. At the instant of rapid decompression, the air in the cabin can no longer hold onto its water vapor, which is then released into the atmosphere as fog.
Chamber altitude is stable at 25,000 feet. High hold is enabled. Cross vent is on and you're clear to commence hypoxia training.
Good, well done. Good, we'll commence hypoxia training on students 7 and 8. Confirm, 7 and 8.
Once the fog clears, then the lack of oxygen at that height begins to tell.
Okay, let's put you out your misery. Start copying these shapes in the right-hand margin.
Without oxygen, at first we begin to see a reduction in their reaction speed, and we see personality changes, much like someone experiences when intoxicated with alcohol. So we see that some students become euphoric, some students become quite subdued, and some students begin to develop forgetfulness.
Have a look at the ugliness of your colleagues' faces, see if they get any prettier whilst you're becoming hypoxic, and carry on with the
We
task.
see increasingly impaired performance in our students. Thinking is slowed and their reaction speed becomes increasingly slowed until they begin to develop sort of lapses of concentration, falling into unconsciousness, and finally death if their oxygen supply is not re-established.
Indicating that the blood is no longer carrying as much oxygen as it was. This is all about you experiencing your personal symptoms and having others observe the symptoms in you.
Flying alone, battling nearly 400-mile-an-hour winds, and defeating the possibility of oxygen deprivation, Alistair Acheson's achievement in saving Flight 5390 was outstanding. Even as the crisis was unfolding, accident investigators were rushing to Southampton to find an explanation. On the ground at Southampton Airport, the search for clues begins. Initial investigation shows no distortion to the frame of the windscreen, so this rules out a problem with the structure. The fact that there are no shards of glass also discounts a bird strike. Stuart Culling, senior investigator with the Air Accident Investigation Branch, has little to go on.
Windscreen was missing, there was a certain amount of blood around, there were some minor dents and scrapes on the fuselage, as you'd expect if the window had gone past, and really that was about it, apart from a lot of paper scattered around inside.
One of his first clues comes from the log recovered from the plane. He knows the plane had been serviced just the day before, and that a windscreen had been replaced. He immediately pays a visit to the British Airways maintenance hangar at Birmingham.
I wanted to find out exactly what had happened to the aircraft before it took off. and I'd arranged that I should talk to the shift maintenance manager who fitted the window. There was a slight problem there because he'd been on night duty, and consequently he had finished his shift at roughly the same time as the windscreen came out of the aircraft, and he wasn't in a fit state to be interviewed. He needed to get some sleep.
Stuart Culling.
Good morning. Nice to see you. I was expecting you.
Yes, good. Thank you very much. Is this the hangar in question?
This is the main hangar, yes.
Yes.
So in the meantime, I looked around the facility. I made sure that any paperwork and any records of the aircraft had been identified and taken away so they couldn't be accessed by anyone else, and waited until he came in.
Hello, I'm from the AIIB. Yes, and this is my colleague. What I'd like to do today is just find out what went on during that shift pattern and how it went. Thank you very much. Did you notice anything about the window itself, any stress marks that were worrying you?
My first conversation with the shift maintenance manager was relatively general, because at that stage we had no evidence that was relevant.
Yourself, you didn't delegate it to somebody else and then check
Stuart,
it?
there's a phone call for you. Just come in.
Oh, right. Would you mind if I took this and come back?
So I took the call and found that it was information about the windscreen which had been found near Didcot, and there were something like 30 bolts found with it, most of which were one size short in diameter, one size too small in diameter.
It was a crucial error. On some planes, windscreens are fitted from the inside and use the internal pressure inside the cabin to keep them in place. But on the 111, the windscreen is bolted on from the outside. Any weakness in the bolts could mean that the pressure inside the plane would blow the windscreen out. It appears Culling has very quickly found the mistake and the guilty man.
I've had some news which I think is very relevant. I've heard from my colleagues who are working on the bolts. They tell me they're the wrong bolts. They're the wrong diameter.
No, that's not possible. They're exactly the same bolts that I took out of there.
He's a professional man. He's very keen on doing things, to his mind, in the interest of the company. And he's suddenly told that he's put a windscreen in using bolts of the wrong size. And he's absolutely shocked.
I can show you. I'll show you the bolts I got out of there.
One thing that came out was that he said, oh, the old bolts went into a waste bin in the hangar where he did the job, and they may still be there. So we rushed across to the waste bin and found something like 80 discarded bolts.
Here. They'll be in here. This is where I put them. These are the bolts.
And these are the ones you checked against the new ones?
That's right, yeah. I took
from the carousel.
It was really excellent evidence. Gold, as far as I was concerned.
Well, I'll take these away.
Okay.
By comparing the maintenance manual to what the engineer had told him, Culling is quickly able to identify the first part of the sequence, what went wrong the previous night when the window of the BAC 111 had been replaced.
We went through the whole chain of events that had occurred, and we found that there were something like 13 different anomalies which led to the fitting of the bolts. And had any of these caused him to think, the sequence of events would not have continued and there wouldn't have been an accident.
The engineer had come early into his shift, and at about 4 a.m. had gone to work removing the old windscreen from the plane. The hangar was full, and the plane had been pushed against the hangar door, which made the windscreen hard to reach. Stretched across the fuselage, he had problems controlling his screwdriver. The windscreen that he had taken out had itself been fitted with the wrong length bolts, but they were still strong enough to hold the screen in, and it survived without a hitch for 4 years. But he was a conscientious engineer, and he decided that he would replace the old bolts with new ones when he installed the new screen. He chose not to go to the parts catalogue and look up the exact bolts he needed. Instead, he went straight to the parts store.
Good morning.
Morning.
There, he matched by eye new bolts with the ones he had taken out of the screen. His eye match was good, and he found a few fresh bolts of exactly the same type in a drawer.
What I'm after is I need 97 Ds. I'm just doing a windscreen on a 111 over there, and I need some new bolts.
8 Ds on a 111?
Well, no, these are 7s. This is a 7. I've just taken it out.
We haven't got any 7s anyway.
OK. Right,
The store manager knew which bolts the engineer should have been looking for, but the engineer chose to ignore his advice. Instead, he drove to the other side of the airport to find a match for his bolts. It was now about 5:15 a.m., and in a dark corner of the hangar, he continued to search for new bolts identical to the ones he'd taken out of the plane. But in the gloom, his luck finally ran out. He thought they matched, but they didn't. He picked bolts that were just over 0.02 of an inch too narrow for the job. Returning to the 111, he stretched over the plane and began fitting these new bolts. Working at an angle, he couldn't see that the new bolts didn't fit correctly. Signing off at 6 a.m., the engineer had managed to get his work done in time. The plane was now ready to be handed over to Captain Lancaster and his crew. In fact, it was a disaster waiting to happen. The morning of the next day, the 111 was at 17,300 feet. The difference in pressure between the sealed hull of the jet and the thin atmosphere was climbing quickly to the half-ton per square foot it would reach at 35,000 feet. This pressure was looking for a weakness, and it found it. For Culling, finding out what had happened that night is only the first step. No one had hidden from him what they'd done, but he knows that he has to go deeper to understand the reasons behind this horrific sequence of events, why the engineer did what he did, and whether this was an isolated incident or the symptom of a bigger problem.
Accident investigation, certainly on aircraft, comprises 2 parts. The first part is what's happened, and that's usually relatively the easy bit. The second part is why did it happen?
Why did the engineer ignore procedure, bypass the technical manuals, and ignore helpful advice? Culling's search for the answers was in its own way revolutionary.
If we talk to people without giving them a warning, we felt we'd get more information because they'd be freer to discuss it. If we gave them a formal caution, as it were, we thought that they would dry up.
Coffee?
Yes, please.
Great. How was the journey in?
Oh, well, usual stuff.
They decide to talk to the engineer well away from the hangar in a cozy hotel room.
Well, thanks for coming in.
To gain insight into the methods of the maintenance engineers, Culling then does something no one had done before. He brings in a behavioral psychologist.
So, is the aircraft normally in the hangar when you're doing that?
Psychologists had been used before to analyze why pilots make mistakes under pressure. It's a discipline called human factors. But in 1990, using human factors in engineering was unheard of.
I wanted a professional slant on what is really psychological territory. I would hope that as far as the shift maintenance manager was concerned, that it gave him extra confidence that we were trying to be even-handed and that we were trying to get to the bottom of it.
You know, the parts catalogue. When you're getting the bolts out, do you go straight to the parts catalogue, or do you just sort of...
Not usually.
Right.
No, if I've got a set of screws and there's the same screws, I just go get them out of the carousels.
Right. You find it's easier to do it visually? It was, in that case, easier to do it visually from the bolts you take now?
Yeah, because they're the same bolts that come out, the same ones go back in, so same size bolts, there's no difference.
And if it worked before, it must be the right bolts?
Yeah, it's just replacing like with like, really.
Yeah, because it had been flying.
We were somewhat horrified that they had admitted those things to us, because after all, we were officially, in inverted commas, and they were quite proud of them. We would have thought that had they used such practices, they would have kept very quiet about it.
If I'd had to go check with the computers what bolts I needed and what parts and how to fit the thing, then there was a good chance it wouldn't have been flying at the time it was meant to be.
Good, good. So, when you're doing the job now, you're an experienced engineer, it might not be by the book all the time, like you would train somebody who was new.
No, not usually. We've been doing these things for years.
Culling was stunned by what he was hearing, but there were more revelations to come. The engineer's dangerous approach was becoming clearer by the minute.
You trusted your own knowledge better than the store supervisor's knowledge?
Well, I'm an engineer. I got 7D bolts out, so I put 7D bolts back in. That's, well, you know, no problem with that. It's that simple.
So you trusted that the aircraft had been flying, so therefore they must have been the right bolts?
Yeah, that aircraft had done lots of hours with that windscreen.
Their whole aim was to expedite work through their station. They had a lot of work coming. It was all done at night, and in many cases they had more work than they could reasonably handle. And they had devised little stratagems to get round that.
Culling and the psychologist's insights made their way into the first draft of the report. It said that there were systemic faults in the maintenance procedure in Birmingham. But under pressure from British Airways lawyers, and because they hadn't carried out their investigation following normal procedure, the final report was forced to change its emphasis.
By hour, I mean the Treasury solicitor or whoever was advising the branch confirmed that under natural law it was unfair to use that information because we hadn't gone through the whole procedure. And so we had to remove that from the report.
The investigators had never produced an accident report like it. Working with the psychologist, Culling developed a completely novel way of using human factors to explain why this accident happened. They uncovered pressures in the hangar that caused an otherwise proficient engineer to make potentially lethal mistakes whilst being certain he was doing the right thing. This psychological approach took air accident prevention to a new level. Through the sheer skill of the crew of BA 5390, as well as a small measure of luck, 87 people are now still alive. As a consequence of this investigation, others may never have to go through the same ordeal. In the aftermath of the accident, the crew were treated as heroes. They received numerous awards, and Alistair Acheson received the coveted gold medal for airmanship. Their colleagues also showed what they felt.
One of the most moving things was to go back to Birmingham. As we walked into the airport, the whole of the airport stopped. And all the ground staff and all the check-in girls and all that just stood and applauded as we walked through the building, and it was really quite, you know, moving at the time. You sort of wanted to get out of the way so that you could sort of, you know, I don't really want to do this. It's like walking up the red carpet sort of thing.
Their colleagues were applauding a team which had demonstrated the highest form of professionalism at every level. A cabin crew which worked as a team in extraordinary circumstances, and the co-pilot, an outsider who took control and worked alone to bring them all safely down to earth. Each of the crew dealt with their experience in different ways. Tim Lancaster began flying again with BA just 5 months after the accident. He's retired from BA, but loves flying so much he's now with another airline.
You cannot say that, she'll shoot you.
It was a special day when the first day I flew. I decided, you know, that was what I was going to do. I was going to make an effort to go back to work and get better. So having made the decision, the rest was easy.
For Nigel, the man who ran to Tim's aid and held on to him for dear life, the impact of that day was far more profound.
I think about it every day. And that is the truth. I think about it every single day. In one form or another, yeah. Every single day. it'll affect me till the end of my days.
Nigel, along with Simon and Sue, no longer fly. But John Heward is still with British Airways as a chief steward. But even he isn't free of the memories of that day.
They were bringing in another British Aerospace aeroplane to where I worked in Birmingham, and unfortunately that window was fitted from the outside, and the layout of the cabin was identical. And when I sat on it, it all came back to you. But for that reason, I've gone back to work at Heathrow and fly long-haul flights again, because those aeroplanes have got no resemblance to the 111 at all.
Alistair Acheson, who is still flying for British Airways, chose not to take part in this film. For each of the crew, the experience will stay with them in different ways. But common to them all is that on that day, their numbers did not come up.
Tim explained it very well, actually. And he said our names were on the page, but we weren't at the top. And I think that was, you know, probably true.
A crowded 747 has disappeared over the Atlantic.
Air India's not showing up.
Pieces are found scattered on the ocean's surface. But the vital clues are deeper than any air crash investigation has ever gone.
In this accident, we had nothing.
It was just mind-boggling.
An international recovery effort goes to the very bottom of the sea to rebuild the shattered plane. What they discover will send shockwaves around the world. Early morning, June the 23rd, 1985. A 747 flies across the Atlantic Ocean, 9.5 kilometers above the water. The jumbo jet is nicknamed Kanishka, after an Indian emperor. And Air India promises passengers it will be a palace in the sky.
Indian hospitality is something that the culture prides itself on, and you do experience that when you fly Air India. The colors are rich and warm inside. It's your gateway to India.
On its way from Canada, the plane is heading to London, England, before continuing on to New Delhi. It's been in the air for 4.5 hours. Captain Hansay Narendra is a veteran Air India pilot. Satwinder Binder is a captain too, who's serving as first officer on the flight. As the plane nears land, Binder talks with the flight's purser.
Yes, sir?
In Shah, do me a small favor. At the back of the plane, seat 54, a boy is sitting there. He just wanted to have a look in the cockpit.
Can I send him now?
After about 15 to 20 minutes.
There are 329 people on board, including passengers and crew. Many of them are flying to India to visit family or friends. Vishnu Pada is traveling to India with his 2 daughters, Their mother, Lata, is already waiting for them there.
We had decided that it would be the ideal year to take an extended vacation in India as a family.
6 minutes after 8 in the morning, co-pilot Binder makes radio contact with air traffic control in Ireland.
Shanwick, Air India 182, good morning.
Station calling Shannon. Go ahead again, please.
Thomas Lane and Michael Quinn are working at the Shannon Control Center.
Air India 182 is 51 north, 15 west at level 310. Estimate FIR at 0735.
Air India 182, Shannon, roger. Cleared for London, flight level 310.
Air India 182 is cleared to London, maintain 310.
You want to come up front now?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go.
It's a light morning at Shannon Control. They're dealing with just 3 planes. But something peculiar has happened.
The signals are all jumbled up.
The signals on radar merged so that it was totally impossible to read the call signs and flight levels of any of the 3 aircraft.
The Air India 747 is flying at 31,000 feet. A TWA jet is several thousand feet above it, and a CP flight is 2,000 feet higher. All are traveling east. Because the planes are stacked on top of each other, the signals have merged on the controller's 2-dimensional screen.
Tom moved the tracker ball on radar and separated the signals.
Two of the planes reappear on the radar, but the Air India flight has vanished.
Air India is not showing up.
Hold on a minute. Air India 182, do you read?
Air India 182, this is Shannon. Do you read? Over.
It's 8:14 in the morning.
I had a gut feeling. To this day, I don't know why I picked up the phone.
Yes, it's Michael Quinn at Shannon. We have a plane off radar.
Normally, a distress call to search and rescue isn't made until a plane has been out of contact for more than 20 minutes. The Air India flight has been missing less than 60 seconds. Several ships in the area begin searching for signs of the plane. Its last known position is some 290 kilometers southwest of Cork. Just 2 hours after the plane disappears, a Canadian-owned cargo ship in the area confirms the worst. The first pieces of wreckage are discovered. Uninflated life rafts are spotted bobbing in the cold Atlantic. Then bodies are seen. It's quickly clear that no one has survived. In India, Lata Pada is waiting for her husband and 2 children to arrive when she hears the news from her brother.
He sat me down and told me that, something terrible had happened. I was just in total shock, and, part of me was trying to digest the information, and part of me was trying to imagine if indeed the worst had happened, how I was going to continue my life without them.
Dozens of bodies arrive in Cork. Many more will follow. Now investigators are faced with the enormous task of finding out how they died and what had caused the crash of Air India Flight 182. 130,000 people live in the city of Cork. Tucked into the southern coast of Ireland, it's long been a vital seaport. On June the 23rd, 1985, a gruesome cargo begins arriving at the city's docks. Just hours after Air India Flight 182 crashes into the sea, bodies and wreckage are brought in by boat. Dr. Cumin Doyle is a pathologist at the Cork Regional Hospital.
The first bodies arrived at 4:45 p.m. on that Sunday afternoon, and at 12 midnight we had 130 bodies.
Doyle and his team will examine the bodies to see if they can find any signs of what caused the crash.
It's an enormous undertaking for everybody involved, the hospital personnel, the police, the Navy, the Army, and pathologists like ourselves, but we just had to get on and do the job.
There are so many autopsies to perform that Doyle moves the work into the building's gym.
We had 3 police people working on each body, photographer, a ballistics expert, and a forensic odontologist. That is a person who examines the teeth, the face, for identification purposes.
In just 4 days, autopsies are performed on 132 victims.
All parts of the body were examined externally in detail, and every detail was noted down. We were looking, of course, for the causes of the fatalities.
Doyle makes a telling discovery. Almost all the victims died in the air.
Only 2 of the bodies showed signs of drowning, which indicated that the others were not breathing when they hit the water.
There's something else that's common to many of the victims. A large number have had their clothes torn off.
Now that was important, because if they had no clothes or little clothes, it indicated that they had fallen from 31,000 feet or so where this accident occurred.
Some of the bodies also have signs of so-called flail injuries. These are breaks specific to bones in the hips, shoulders, and other joints. H.S. Kohler is the lead investigator into the Air India disaster. The flail injuries tell him the passengers weren't in the plane when it hit the ocean.
They are caused by tumbling, violent motion of the body in air. And that is the pattern of the injuries when a passenger is thrown out of the aircraft at a high altitude.
The autopsies show that somehow the plane had been ripped apart high above the water. Passengers were thrown into the sky long before the plane crashed.
Based on the injuries, we could only say that the plane had broken up at 31,000 feet. We couldn't say what the cause of the breakup was.
The biggest challenge in this accident was that we had no physical evidence available to us in this accident in terms of wreckage, in terms of passengers, crew, or in terms of eyewitnesses. In this accident, we had nothing.
The most important job of the investigators is to try to find the plane's black boxes. The 2 devices record cockpit conversation and other technical information about the flight of the plane. The recorders have radio beacons which send out a signal at a designated frequency. But it's still a huge task. The boxes are more than 6,500 feet below the surface, and the radio signals last just 30 days. Salim Jiwa is a journalist who has investigated the Air India disaster.
The search for the black boxes was urgent, and 3 countries participated in it: England, Ireland, and India.
But even with such a massive response, early efforts are frustrated.
42 kilohertz. It's too high. It can't be them.
Investigators are picking up radio signals, but they're at the wrong frequency. As the search continues, H.S. Kohler and his team study the maintenance history of the plane. They want to know if an undetected flaw had caused the jet to come apart in flight. They uncover a potentially important piece of information. The Air India jet was flying with 5 engines. A 747 normally has 4 engines, but it can carry more. The plane was designed so that it could transport a malfunctioning engine beneath its wings. Ground crews can mount the engine to a bracket on the plane. It's exactly what happened to the Air India jet.
There was an extra engine that a previous flight had left behind that was mounted on the wing of the aircraft.
The extra engine creates substantial drag on the left side of the plane. If the pilots don't properly compensate, the plane will start turning in that direction.
And this hypothesis continued that there is possibility that this 5th engine might have caused the breakup of the wing.
In fact, investigators discover that before the plane took off for London, the flight engineer noticed problems with the way the engine was attached.
There was a small problem in the 5th engine. I've asked them to fix it up.
All right.
Investigators also learned that some internal parts of the extra engine were taken out and stored in Flight 182's cargo bay. They are so enormous that pieces of the cargo door were removed to make the job easier.
Some of the other parts of the engine went into the rear of the aircraft. Aircraft such as the 747 can handle this quite easily. It's routinely done.
But if the cargo door wasn't reassembled properly, it could have led to an explosive decompression. In 1974, a cargo door blew off a Turkish Airlines flight shortly after it took off from Paris. The sudden decompression crippled the plane. It crashed moments later, killing everyone on board. Kohler must consider 2 theories. Either problems with the door or with the extra engine itself brought down the plane. If either one had taken place, there should be evidence on the plane's black boxes. Finding the recorders has become increasingly important. Almost 2 weeks after the search begins, investigators get news that helps them pinpoint the location of the black boxes.
The signal will be higher. So this 42 kilohertz could be it. Tell the boats to look again.
The piece of the black box which broadcasts the locator signal is made of ceramic. If it's damaged, the frequency of the signal can change. It means the strange frequency ships detected earlier could be the right one. Both the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder are finally located. But they're so deep, it's difficult to bring them up.
The aircraft was at 6,000 feet below the sea, and it was the depth that was sort of defeating.
A deep-sea submersible is brought in. But even with this specialized vehicle and with the location of the black boxes known, it takes 4 attempts to bring the recorders to the surface.
Estimate FIR at 0735.
Air India 182, Shannon, roger. Cleared for London.
Lead investigator Kohler now has what he hopes are 2 vital pieces of the puzzle.
If there's any problem in the aircraft, the crew will be talking about the problem. They will not be silent about the problem.
But when he listens to the cockpit voice recorder, Kohler hears nothing unusual. After the last contact with air traffic control in Shannon, the voice recorder picks up the crew talking about customs seals.
To seal the bar before the
It's
arrival.
paperwork that has to be completed before landing.
Have not been used. And they want about 30 custom seals.
Customs?
Yeah, custom seals to seal the bar before its arrival.
The conversation ends in mid-sentence.
That was it. And then everything was, of course, silent.
The cockpit voice recorder indicated that there was no abnormality in the cockpit, no emergency. Every conversation was normal.
The plane's flight data recorder tells a similar story. Kohler pours through details about Air India's speed, altitude, and dozens of other pieces of information. The extra engine did cause the plane to bank slightly, and the jet's rudder was turned 11 degrees to the right. But this was exactly what the crew needed to do to offset the drag created by the fifth engine.
We found that all parameters of the aircraft altitude, aircraft heading, aircraft bank attitude, roll attitude, autopilot engaged, everything was working normally till the last point.
After analyzing both black boxes, Kohler can't find any evidence that the plane was in trouble before it suddenly disappeared from radar. But the very lack of evidence does suggest something. Both recorders get their power from the plane's engines. Both stopped at exactly 14 minutes and 1 second after 8 in the morning. Since the recorders stopped working at the same time, the problem on the plane had to be catastrophic enough to sever the jet's electronic system before the crew could react.
Yeah, custom seals to seal the bar before its arrival.
Investigators are becoming convinced that there are only two possible explanations for the crash: a devastating decompression or a bomb. They study the wreckage that's been found floating on the surface of the ocean, but it's just a small percentage of the entire plane. And none of it is helpful to investigators. It offers no clues to explain why the plane crashed.
We knew there was no fire. We knew the aircraft was performing well. Everything was normal. There was no cockpit emergency, no warning. We got elimination of all the things, but we did not got the answer as what happened. To go to the cause of the accident, we had to go to the wreckage which was lying at the bottom of the sea.
But what parts of the plane should investigators focus on? The black boxes were equipped with radio transmitters which made them easier to find. But the debris field is deep underwater and enormous, some 16 kilometers long and 6 kilometers across. How do investigators identify the one clue that will help them unlock the mystery? Roy Truman is an underwater salvage expert. He's brought in to do something that's never been done before: retrieve the ruined pieces of a jumbo jet from the bottom of the ocean. In hundreds of thousands of pieces, he needs to find the ones that will explain why the plane crashed.
Up until that time, we had only been used with recovering small aircraft. Here we're talking about a 747, which was huge, and we had no idea of the size of the pieces and what we were going to find.
Investigators know they can't bring the entire wreck to the surface. It's so deep it takes hours to recover a single piece. The submersible takes underwater video and still photos. Investigators use those to decide which pieces to bring to the surface.
It was a narrow corridor, and at each end of the corridor It was very light wreckage. All of the heavy stuff, engines, main aircraft structure was in the middle of the wreckage field.
Like searching for a needle in an underwater haystack, investigators hope to discover the cause of the crash in a tangle of ruined metal. But autumn is coming. Soon the weather will turn bad and they'll have to abandon their search. The key to unlocking the disaster still lies somewhere at the bottom of the ocean. Investigators from India are scouring the ocean floor, trying to find out why Air India Flight 182 fell from the sky. As the work continues in Ireland, there's growing suspicion in Canada that the Air India crash was no accident. As police and investigators sift through the list of passengers on the plane, they find something peculiar. Many of the passengers who were on Air India Flight 182 began their day in Vancouver. They were using another plane to connect to Flight 182. One of the passengers who bought a ticket for that plane never got on.
Well, the passenger, we have never identified him per se, but the ticket identified him as M. Singh. It simply had an initial, but no full name. We believe that name to be was fictitious and that the person never intended to travel.
While he never boarded the plane, M. Singh did check in.
Next, please. On your way to Toronto?
And I want my bag checked through to Delhi.
Sir, I can't do that. Your reservation is only confirmed to Toronto.
Oh, I am confirmed. This is my ticket.
Jeannie Adams is a ticket agent working for
You
Canadian
are on standby
Pacific.
to Delhi. I can't. Mr. Singh, you are on standby to Delhi. I can't.
But then I have to pick up my bag.
I can't check your bags through to India if you are not confirmed.
But I am indeed confirmed. Wait, I'll get my brother. He'll tell you.
There are as many as 30 people waiting to check
Do
in.
that, sir. Your reservation is only confirmed.
Adams doesn't have time to wait for the man's brother.
Oh, okay. I'll check it through. But you have to check with Air India when you get to Toronto. Your seat is 10B.
Even though Singh doesn't have a ticket taking him to India, his bag is checked straight through. His luggage is loaded, but no one notices that Singh never boards the plane that leaves Vancouver.
She broke the rules as they were. She should not have allowed that to go through for New Delhi Interline. But she was so bullied and so browbeaten by Mr. Singh in front of everybody else that I think to her eternal sadness and heartbreak, she gave in.
Singh's maroon bag didn't raise any concerns when it was loaded in Vancouver. Since the Air India flight was international, when the bag arrived in Toronto, it faced a more strict series of inspections.
This is what it will sound like.
John D'Souza is a security officer for Air India. The day of the flight, he demonstrated a portable explosives detector for baggage handlers in Toronto. Chemicals in a match triggered the device, as would chemicals used in some explosives.
Okay.
The portable device was put to use because the X-ray machine, which normally scans every piece of luggage, had broken down.
The technology, especially the X-ray technology, were very weak, very in their infancy at that time, and it didn't work reliably. And in the case of the Air India episode, the technology went quite badly wrong, which was one of the tragedies of this situation.
As security workers used the portable explosives wand on the bags, everything seemed normal, until they got to the maroon bag. The bag did trigger the device, but the sound it made was very different from the one workers heard during the demonstration. The bag was passed and allowed on board the plane, eventually flying towards England. Over the Atlantic Ocean, carrying M. Singh's bag, an explosion rips through Tokyo's Narita Airport. 2 baggage handlers are killed, 4 people are injured. A bomb has been hidden inside another piece of luggage that came from Vancouver. Luggage that was bound for another Air India jet.
And it was headed for the cargo hold. When it exploded on the ground, once it was put on, the bag was probably just thumped a little bit, and it exploded as the 2 Japanese baggage handlers were putting it on a conveyor belt.
Just as on Flight 182, one of the bags being moved in Tokyo was checked in by a passenger who never boarded the flight.
There was no X-ray machines in use at Vancouver Airport. There was nothing to stop that bag from flying to Tokyo.
There's a disturbing connection between the Tokyo bombing and the Air India flight. The tickets for the men who checked both bags were bought on the same day by the same customer. The single crash of Air India Flight 182 has suddenly become part of a much larger story. With the apparent connection between the 2 incidents, investigators in Ireland are extremely interested in what police find in Tokyo. Soon after the bombing, forensic experts descend on Japan's Narita Airport. There are traces of evidence everywhere.
The Narita bombing was within a confined space. So unlike the Air India Flight 182 situation, where we had debris scattered over 9 miles under the ocean and pretty hard to retrieve, we had, in a sense, the good fortune of a contained area where an explosive device went off.
Pieces of metal and circuit boards are embedded in the walls. Explosive residue clings to parts of the container that housed the bomb.
Amazingly, Japanese forensic experts were able to pick out tiny parts and fragments, and all the analysis finally led Japanese police to identify the vehicle that was used to carry the bomb.
Experts even find serial numbers on pieces of the wreckage. Clues that show the bomb was hidden inside a specific stereo tuner made by Sanyo. All 2,000 tuners that were ever made were shipped to a warehouse near Vancouver, British Columbia. From there, they were sent to stores across the region. One of those tuners carried the bomb that exploded at Narita. Police have a difficult task trying to trace the sale of 2,000 tuners. They could have been sold to anyone. Most of the stores that had received the tuner had been sold out for years. But police get a break when they ask about the tuner at a store in Duncan, a tiny town on Vancouver Island. The last unit had been sold just a few weeks ago.
They were able to figure out who bought the stereo tuner which contained the bomb.
Police obtained the same sort of tuner that was used to house the bomb on Air India. They conduct tests to see how big the bomb would have to be to create the sort of damage that was found in Tokyo.
There was a progressive experimentation using dynamite to find out the extent of damage particular strands of dynamite would cause.
They match the size of the tuna fragments made after each explosion with the fragments that were found at Narita. They discover that just a few sticks of dynamite were likely used in the Tokyo bomb. But could just 4 sticks of dynamite really bring down a jet? Once they discover just how powerful the Narita bomb was, police place it into a fully loaded luggage container. The devastation is enormous.
Any decompression caused by an event, an explosive device in the luggage hole, would be sufficient to cause catastrophic results for that aircraft. You don't need much. 4 sticks of dynamite can do the job.
The cramped quarters of a cargo hold amplify the power of a bomb. Tests conducted at Penn State University show that the shock waves created from a bomb blast don't travel in just one direction, but reverberate inside a luggage container, building on each other, vastly increasing the initial force of the explosion. If a bomb had indeed exploded in the cargo hold of Air India, it would have caused enormous amounts of destruction. It's the sort of damage that should have left its mark on the remains of Flight 182. Investigators have a growing suspicion that this plane was brought down by a bomb, but they still have no proof.
So the investigators were not only looking for something that was broken that might have caused the failure, but they were looking for signs of what caused the explosion, such as burning or solvent stains or possibly shrapnel in seats. It meant a lot tighter scrutiny of every piece of wreckage.
We kept on analyzing each photograph. Is it giving any indication of an explosion? Is it giving any impact damage?
Knowing his time is running out, Kohler selects a few key pieces of the plane to bring to the surface. Bad weather forces him to leave the rest behind. Kohler hopes the bits he does have can prove there was a bomb on board. Each piece that's brought up is carefully mapped to its original position on the jet. One of the most promising sections brought up from the bottom is the floor of the front cargo bay.
When we recovered that item, we found that it had holes which are of a very special nature. Penetration from inside to outside at a very high speed. Curling of the edges of that one. And that was indicative of that perhaps this is the place where the explosion had occurred.
As many as 20 holes are found. In each, the metal is bent outward, like the petals of a flower. These are classic signs of something being blown out from the cargo bay. On the side wall of the cargo bay, investigators find more clues. Additional holes are discovered, like the ones on the floor. These also appear to have been blown out from the cargo hold. A closer study of the ceiling of the cargo bay also indicates that the ribs connecting it to the fuselage were broken by being forced up. Investigators are convinced that the wreckage shows that a bomb had exploded in the forward cargo hold. If the bomb had gone off in the front of the plane, it would explain why the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder cut off so quickly. Like other 747s, the electronics bay on the Air India flight is located below the cockpit. Many of the important electrical systems on the plane run through here. The forward luggage compartment is right beside it.
And so when the bomb went off, the explosion would have taken out the computers completely, and there would have been absolutely dead silence, and that's precisely what happened.
Investigators are convinced that Air India Flight 182 has been destroyed by a bomb. This was no accident. The crash of the passenger jet was a crime.
Nobody thought that such an evil plot of blowing 2 aircraft simultaneously would occur from Vancouver.
Exhaustive detective work creates a clear picture of what likely happened on board the Air India jet. In Toronto, M. Singh's bag is taken off the Vancouver flight and moved onto the Air India jet. It's put into a luggage container that's eventually placed at the front of the jet, right behind the plane's electronics bay. As the plane sailed over the Atlantic Ocean, the crew had no warning that a bomb was ticking down to disaster.
They want about 30 custom seals.
Customs?
Yeah, custom seals to seal the bar before its arrival.
When the force of the blast hit the floor of the jet, it pushed it violently upwards. The thin fuselage would have been blown apart. The air pressure inside the plane would have rushed out, tearing passengers from the cabin and fatally crippling the jet.
The debris scattered over 9 miles is an indication of how rapidly and how fearsome this whole decompression was. But in this instance, the aircraft completely didn't stand a chance of flight. There was no way of continuing flight in this case.
As the jet fell towards the sea, the forces put on the fuselage tore it apart.
It would have a tail torn off and the wings would start breaking. And there's no way of sustaining flight after that. It goes into gyrations. Once it goes into gyrations, there was just massive structural failure.
After months of painstaking work, investigators believe they have unraveled the cause of the Air India crash. They've proven a bomb brought the plane down. It's now up to police to find the bombers. But with so many deaths and so many more possible if the Narita bomb had exploded in mid-air, there's immediate interest in making passenger jets safer.
This was one of the biggest disasters in the Indian aviation history. And it could have been avoided if the procedures were in place.
As the hunt for the killers continues, extraordinary steps are taken to tighten security and to see if jets can be made to withstand the force of a bomb. It's May 1997. More than 10 years after a terrorist bomb destroyed Air India Flight 182. An out-of-service 747 is about to take part in a remarkable test. 2 bombs are placed in the front cargo bay. 2 more are put in the back.
Well, the Burning-Thorpe test was actually intended to prove 5 years worth of research, that we can protect an airplane using hardened luggage containers or hardened liners in the cargo hold.
The plane is also pressurized to simulate the conditions a jet would encounter at cruising altitude.
Pressurization is the key to that kind of experiment. The added energy that you have from the pressurization inside the airplane adds to the damage. You can think of it as a balloon. If you take a pin and you put it in a balloon that's uninflated, you get just a simple hole the size of the pin. However, if you blow that balloon up and you hit it with a pin, it pops catastrophically.
When the bombs are detonated, the result is devastating.
The force of the blast plus the pressure inside the jet just tore the plane apart. And that's the closest we can come to seeing what would have happened to a jet in flight.
The destructive power of bombs on the jets is well known. But what the tests at Bruntingthorpe showed was that relatively simple measures can substantially minimize the damage caused by an explosion. One of the bombs in the rear cargo hold was placed in a normal luggage container. But the bombs in the front cargo hold were different. One was placed in a specialized container strengthened with a material similar to that found in bulletproof vests. The other was put in a normal container, but placed beside walls that had been reinforced with a blast-absorbing liner. When the bombs explode, the front of the plane is virtually untouched.
We had no breach of the airplane skin with the liner or with the hardened luggage containers. But towards the rear of the airplane or the tail, where we didn't have any of the hardened materials, it was a catastrophic failure for the airplane.
The standard luggage container did nothing to minimize the blast. Both the protective lining in the front cargo bay and the hardened luggage container were able to absorb the force of the explosion.
It's only speculation, but would steps like these have saved Air India? Very likely. Would they make the industry safer today? Absolutely.
Despite the dramatic results of the tests in Britain, hardened luggage containers are not used by world's airlines. While effective at stopping bombs, they're extremely expensive.
The hardened containers are not in use now because it's just not economically feasible. The containers cost the tens of thousands of dollars just to purchase, and they're very fragile. They're composite materials, so if you run into the side of them with a forklift, they're pretty much useless from that point forward.
There have been significant improvements made to the way that passenger luggage is screened at most international airports. More sophisticated color X-ray systems using multiple scanning beams are now used.
But I am indeed confirmed. Wait, I'll get my brother. He'll tell you.
Oh, okay. I'll check it through. But you have to check with Air India when you get to Toronto.
And there are stricter regulations about luggage getting sent forward on connecting flights.
In the case of Air India, the most important thing of all was passenger baggage reconciliation. This is the key to detecting an explosive device or a terrorist. No plane leaves with baggage unattached to a specific passenger inside that plane. And that must be so.
Your seat is 10B.
I think one of the most difficult piece of news for the families to accept was the many ways in which this tragedy could have been prevented. I mean, it was absolutely unforgivable that a bag could be interlined to another destination without a passenger accompanying it.
The quality of training that security guards at airports get also came under scrutiny during the years after the Air India crash. It's still an area of concern for some security experts.
There's a real failure to train security personnel. And that failure is because you cannot pay rent-a-cops subsistent wages to look after your security when you get on board an aircraft.
In the Air India case, police eventually traced the bombing to Sikh extremists living in Canada. They're fighting to have an independent Sikh homeland created in India. The man who confessed to assembling the bomb is sent to prison. The man suspected of masterminding the plot is killed several years later while under arrest in India. Both men had deep ties to Canada's West Coast Sikh community. It's a connection that still bothers Lata Pada.
It was a deliberate act of terrorism, and hurts even more that they were executed by Canadians on Canadian soil against Canadians.
More than 20 years after the destruction of the Air India flight, the shock of the day is still fresh. And many questions remain unanswered.
We still don't know who the two people were who checked in the bags. Apart from the basics of who made the bomb, we don't know much about who else assisted them. We don't know who picked up those tickets. There's a vow of silence that has hindered the investigation.
This inquiry will be launched immediately.
In 2006, the Canadian government launched an inquiry into the Air India bombing, another investigation of what happened and why. The shocking death of so many is a continuing source of anger and disbelief. No matter what the inquiry finds, the sobering facts are the same. 329 people killed in an instant. There are memorials now in Ireland and Canada, mourning the victims of the Air India crash, marking the day a terrorist bomb ripped through the lives of so many.
It's just so tragic about all our lives that we lead. Every day is an ordinary day in our lives, but some days, unexpectedly, something completely, totally unexpected shatters your life, and that was one of those moments.
Beatles 28, you are clear for takeoff.
Knots. Stop! Don't hammer the brakes. Don't hammer the brakes.
137 people are on board this British Air Tours flight. Within minutes, nearly half of them will be dead.
This should not really have happened.
Evacuate! Evacuate!
The aircraft didn't even get airborne. It didn't run off the runway, and yet still 55 people were killed.
For investigators, it's a familiar routine. Reconstructing the final moments inside the cabin, analyzing the wreckage and the flight data recorders. In the end, they turn to a psychologist to help them figure out how a survivable emergency turned into one of British aviation's most horrific disasters. It's just before 6 in the morning on August the 22nd, 1985. Manchester's airport is coming to life. The first flights of the day are being prepped for departure. British Air Tours Flight 28 is scheduled to take 131 passengers from Manchester to the Greek island of Corfu. British Air Tours is a division of British Airways, specializing in low-cost flights to vacation destinations. It's a chilly morning. A slight breeze is blowing, ideal flying weather. Most of the passengers on this early morning flight are traveling on vacation. Lindsay Davis is heading to Greece with her boyfriend, Charlie Thixon.
All right, let's go.
We'd been going out with each other for a year, and that's one of the reasons we were so excited about it. You know, it was our first holiday together.
Captain Peter Terrington is in command.
I was the senior training captain on the fleet.
First Officer Brian Love is being trained by Terrington.
He was going to perform the takeoff and landing as part of his training.
All right, Captain? Yep. Briefing then, Brian. Airfield emergencies, you handling the aircraft. What are the 4 things you're going to stop for?
Fire, failure, configuration warning, or you shouting stop.
Okay, so you bring the thing to a stop, and I'll take over the aircraft and leave you to deal with the emergency. I'll liaise with ATC, okay?
If you've talked about the possibility of an emergency and talked over what you will do, then if it actually happens, it's easier to recall those items.
Okay, Brian, start 2.
Starting 2. Oil pressure rising.
Okay, go on.
25, 26, 27, 28, 29. 129 plus 2 on board, Captain. All strapped in. Doors are closed and automatic.
Thank you, Arthur.
The crew is flying a Boeing 737. It takes just 4 minutes for the plane to reach the foot of the runway.
B-Tours 28, you are clear for takeoff.
The 737 has 3,000 meters to get to takeoff speed. The engines are pushed to high power.
I was sitting by the window, looking out of the window. Everything was normal. The plane was going quite fast.
80 knots.
Check.
We heard a dull thud, which sounded as if it came from outside. I was really keen to see what was going on outside, but couldn't see anything.
Captain Terrington needs to act fast.
Stop!
And the immediate reaction was to stop. We were quite a few knots below our decision speed, so I very quickly closed the throttles and applied reverse thrust.
We could feel the aircraft slowing down, and Arthur said, "Oh, I think we've blown a tyre," and I didn't know, so we just waited to hear it.
Don't hammer the brakes. Don't hammer the brakes.
I thought the tyre might have gone and would cause damage to the undercarriage if we braked too strongly.
Probably nothing. I wouldn't worry.
And just assumed that maybe a tyre had burst, so I wasn't really alarmed at that point. My thought at that time was, oh, okay, we're going to get off this plane and probably have to move all the luggage onto another plane and take off.
Soon, passengers on the left side of the plane see the real problem.
I could see orange flames inside the back of the engine. And at that point, I thought, it's obviously not a burst tyre, that wouldn't cause that, and this is perhaps something a bit more serious.
Let me by. I'm not staying there.
But at that point, I knew that I wanted to get off the plane, and I wasn't happy at all. I knew that there was a fire, and I just wanted to get away from the fire.
Smoke is seeping into the cabin.
Please sit down.
My nearest exit was at the back. I didn't want to go to the back because the smoke was coming in there. So I decided in my mind that I was going to go through the front. I said to Charlie,
On, we're going.
And that's when I started going towards the front of the plane.
Stopping. 28 Mike, we are abandoning takeoff. Looks like we've got a fire on number 1.
Looks like there's a lot of fire.
Thank you.
Plane on fire, runway 24.
From where he's sitting, Captain Terrington can't see how bad the fire is. He needs advice from the tower.
We have to get the passengers off.
I would do by the starboard side.
Terrington decides to pull off the runway.
Evacuate to the starboard side, please. Fire drill, engine number 1. Shutting down 2.
Evacuate! Evacuate! Please stay calm!
Before the flight crew leaves the cockpit, they must complete a 15-step checklist.
Parking brake.
Set.
Speed brake lever.
Down.
But time is running out.
We had an evacuation checklist, but it was 4 pages long, and the last item was to get the passengers off.
Engine and APU fire warning switches.
This didn't cover my problem at all.
On the 737, there are 4 cabin doors. The 2 in the back are covered in flames and smoke, leaving only 2 for 137 people. Then a mechanical problem eliminates one of those.
Well, Arthur was opening one right, and it was really it was really trying to open. It was really hard to open.
The back of the cabin is filling with smoke. It's making breathing difficult. Passengers rush forward.
It just seemed to go on forever before they started evacuating. And that's when I thought, I'm not going to get off, it's going to blow up with all of us on it.
Engine and APU fire warning switches.
Right now, all 137 people on board are alive. But with every second, their odds of surviving are decreasing. Flight 28 is becoming a death trap. The jammed door on the right side of British Air Tours Flight 28 leaves the crew no choice. They must get the passengers out from the side of the plane that's burning.
As soon as we opened the door, the fire service were already around, shooting foam up the slide that came into the galley floor. We wanted to start to evacuate the passengers, but there's a bit of a bottleneck and nobody was coming forward. The aisle is quite narrow where the galley is, and they were and then they were pushing forward, and I could see this boy that was really sort of pushed against the wall. He couldn't get out, so I pulled him by his T-shirt, had the yellow T-shirt on, and he sort of tumbled forward, and after that, everybody sort of just tumbled in behind him. And we just directed him down the slide. In training, they tell you to, bring people to the door, and you tell them to jump.
Desperate to get people off the plane quickly, the purser returns to the jammed door. After several attempts, he manages to force it open.
The only time I turned around was to make sure that Charlie was following me.
See you out there?
One thing I did see when I looked back was people going to the front, towards the front of the plane where the seats are, and pushing the seats forward, folding them down as they went along. So people were trying to rush forward from the back. The chute was open and people were just jumping up straight onto the chute. As I got to the bottom, I didn't look back at all. I was just wanting to get off.
Dozens of passengers have made it off the plane, but there are still many more inside.
But it was smouldering and it was black, thick black smoke. And Charlie had said that after you'd gone, this black smoke came down, he said, and everybody was screaming and panicking. He said people are going to die in there.
Standby power switch.
Captain Peter Terrington and his first officer, Brian Love, are still aboard the burning airplane, and they still haven't completed the steps required to evacuate.
There was 4 tons of fuel coming out of that aircraft wing tank.
Okay, go, Brian. Go, Brian.
I could see quite a lot of flames.
Completing the checklist would put their lives at risk.
We did as many items as we could, and then we both went out of the flight deck window.
There are no more passengers at the exits, so Joanna Toff decides to see if anyone else is left in the cabin.
And the smoke was you could touch it. It was so thick, and you could take it was awful, really.
Go.
There was a young girl just a bit further down in the cabin, but she was really disorientated. I mean, I suppose we all were, really. We just didn't have any idea what was going on. I just brought her down to the slide. She was taken off then. The fireman was telling me to come on, and I was thinking, well, I've not finished, you know, we've not finished yet.
When Toff re-enters the cabin, the thick smoke makes it as hard to see as it is to breathe.
It was really dark and quiet. I'd never seen anything like it. And I could see the light from the door anyway by then, so I knew where the door was.
The smoke forces Toff to abandon her search. Just minutes after pulling off the runway, British Air Tours Flight 28 has been consumed by fire.
We got out of a flight deck which was relatively intact, and when we turned round on the ground, we saw a complete wreck of an aircraft, and it had happened in a matter of seconds. It was dreadful.
54 people are dead. Another would die in hospital.
There was nothing wrong, really, with us. We thought nothing physical wrong with us. But our lives changed, you know, just in those few hours.
I couldn't breathe. I was virtually out the door, and I couldn't breathe then.
The smoke was coming in and everybody just stood up and ran out. It was just a mad panic getting out. It was when the smoke came, you just couldn't see anything at all. Couldn't see anybody.
It takes 125 firefighters more than 2 hours to put out the fire. News of the disaster soon spreads around the world. British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher flies to Manchester to visit the scene.
When we get a terrible air crash of this kind, everyone is appalled and shocked. Every single aspect of this accident will be thoroughly investigated. It has to be.
This is the 4th major commercial air disaster of the year. In June of 1985, an Air India jet exploded over the Atlantic Ocean. 329 people were killed. Weeks later, 137 people died when a Delta Airlines flight crashed at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. And just 10 days before the Manchester crash, the deadliest single aircraft accident in history. Japan Airlines Flight 123, a fully loaded 747, slammed into a mountain, killing 520 people. British Air Tours Flight 28 adds 55 new victims to the list of casualties. 1985 is now the deadliest year in the history of commercial aviation. The flying public is getting nervous. Britain's Air Accidents Investigation Branch sends a team to Manchester to unravel the events that led to the catastrophe. Among them, Stephen Moss. He'll be inspecting the plane's engines.
This should not really have happened. The aircraft didn't even get airborne. It didn't run off the runway, and yet still 55 people were killed.
Chris Prothero is also on the team. His focus is on the fire.
We were aware from initial reports that the fire had entered the aircraft very rapidly as the aircraft came to a halt, and that was a focus for me.
It doesn't take too long for Stephen Moss to figure out where the trouble started. He sees damage to the plane that was not caused by fire.
Well, the first thing we noticed clearly was the hole in the underside of the wing. And right next to it was a gaping hole in the side of the engine. It seems that one had led to the other.
To get a plane loaded with passengers off the ground, you need to generate massive thrust. That power is created when air travels through the front of the engine to a series of compressor fans. It's then ignited, and the exhaust pushes the plane forward. Something had clearly gone very wrong with Flight 28's left engine. Investigators look for clues on the runway and in the cabin, hoping to discover why so many people died.
Entering the cabin for the first time, there was as with all aircraft fires, there's an overwhelming and pungent smell. Burning plastic, burnt fuel, burning material had dropped down onto seats, and so that the aisles were filled up with the remains of overhead lockers. A scene of devastation.
The damage in the cabin is revealing. It's almost completely charred up high, but is relatively intact down low.
It was clear that there had not been flashover in this particular case.
A flashover occurs when the gases in an enclosed space become so hot that they ignite, incinerating everything around them. The way Flight 28's cabin is charred tells Prothero about the nature of the fire.
Many of the seat squab, cushions, even things like the emergency evacuation cards, which are just plastic laminated cards, were pretty much undamaged. You could have wiped them off and put them on another aircraft and nobody would have known they'd been in this accident, whereas at the upper levels in the fuselage, there was a great deal of heat damage, and this is not a characteristic of a flashover.
The fire in the cabin had been severe, but should not have been catastrophic. This leaves investigators with two questions. Why did so many people die? And what caused the fire? The answer to the second question may be outside the plane, lying on the runway. Investigators find a large piece of dome-shaped metal along the plane's path. Stephen Moss can see it's from a piece of the engine called a combustor can.
It looks like there'd been a separation of the can from the front end from the back end.
The combustion chamber of the 737's jet engines contains 9 combustor cans. It's where fuel and air are mixed and ignited, so each can needs to withstand intense heat. Moss suspects the fractured can somehow blew apart and destroyed the plane's left engine.
It had struck an underwing fuel tank access panel and put a sizable hole in that, which directly led to the release of a vast quantity of fuel.
Proving the piece of the combustion can penetrated the wing is easy. It fits neatly into the hole in the wing.
This was clearly, if you like, the root cause of the accident.
The engine on the plane is a Pratt & Whitney JT8D. For Moss, that's of grave concern.
At the time, was probably the most widely used jet engine on commercial air transport in the world. And it was obviously pretty urgent that we try and find the cause of this one in order to prevent other aircraft having the same problem.
There are tens of thousands of combustor cans in service around the world. One of them erupted in Manchester. Stephen Moss needs to find out why it failed. And fast. Investigators looking into the deadly fire on board British Air Tours Flight 28 study the plane's maintenance log. they discover the combustor can that ruptured had previously been repaired.
We needed to look at that repair and how effective it was.
During a routine inspection a year and a half earlier, mechanics had found small cracks in some of the combustor cans.
It was certainly not uncommon to find fatigue cracks in the cans. They're operating in a high temperature environment. The manuals give various schemes for repairing these cracks.
Investigators find mechanics repaired the cracks according to a procedure laid out in the engine repair manual. They welded them closed. But the crack on can number 9 was unusually long.
The overhaul manual did not give any limit on the length of crack that could be repaired, and it was a longer crack than had been experienced before. It was still repaired.
After the repaired cans were put back in the engine, mechanics had no way of knowing the weld didn't effectively seal the crack. That's because the cans can't be inspected while the engine is on the plane. Since the repair, there were 11 reports of slow acceleration from the engine that exploded in Manchester. A damaged combustor can could have been a reason for the problem. But troubleshooting guides available to mechanics in Manchester didn't list that as a potential cause. Instead, Pratt & Whitney offered other ways to fix the acceleration problem.
It didn't seem to ring any great alarm bells with them, if you like. They'd seen it before, and it had never turned out to be anything serious.
So mechanics in Manchester made minor adjustments to fix the plane's idle speed and kept the plane in operation. Cockpit voice recordings revealed that the crew of Flight 28 was aware there was a problem with slow acceleration.
Slow acceleration on number 1 engine day before yesterday.
I was on the flight, yes, sir.
Engineers signed off on it.
But the log entry led Captain Terrington to believe that the problem had been fixed.
A comment in the tech log for the flight before the last one that the engine was slow in accelerating. It wasn't apparent as a serious problem because the engineers had done some work and the aircraft had been flying the previous day with no problems.
The idle speed adjustments didn't fix the real problem, the cracked combustor can. And it reached the breaking point on Flight 28.
Stopping. 28 Mike, we are abandoning takeoff.
Evacuate! Evacuate! Please stay calm and don't panic.
If the airline had inspected the cans, I think there is no doubt that they would have seen the problem.
Investigators now know the origins of the Manchester disaster. The welded crack in combustor can number 9 gave way as Flight 28 sped down the runway. The front of the can was ejected from the engine and put a hole in the underside of the left wing. That led to a huge fuel leak onto the damaged engine, which caused the fire. Engine fires are not uncommon. The body of a 737 is insulated with fire-retardant material to protect the cabin. Investigators still don't understand how a fire outside the plane spread into the cabin as quickly as it did. Fire Inspector Chris Prothero finds part of the answer from viewing photographs of the plane as it sped down the runway.
It was clear from these photographs that there was a very dynamic phase to the fire whilst the aircraft was at speed on the runway, which produced this energetic, turbulent, sort of blowtorching type of fire, visually anyway, trailing behind the aircraft.
A press photo from the day of the crash leads Prothero to a new theory.
The photographs of the aircraft that appeared in the press showed the left thrust reverser deployed. The general impression that one got visually from that photograph was that the thrust reversers had effectively blowtorched fire against the side of the fuselage, and that, if you like, was the explanation as to why the fire had penetrated so quickly. That photograph and the implications of it actually, therefore, loomed quite large.
Stop! There are several ways to bring a speeding jetliner to a halt. One is with the brakes.
Don't hammer the brakes.
Another is with the engine's thrust reversers. Thrust reversers redirect the exhaust from the jet engine forwards. This helps slow the plane down.
It looked as though the thrust reversers had simply blown this big fire on the left of the aircraft directly onto the side of the aircraft, directly onto the rear fuselage.
That would explain why the fire destroyed the cabin so quickly. It now seems possible that Captain Terrington made the fire worse by trying to slow his plane down. But Prothero has two good reasons to doubt his theory. One is the location where charring from the burning exhaust gas, or efflux, was found.
The efflux impinges on the fuselage further up, closer to the roof, the crown skins of the aircraft. So actually, the penetration that we had low down did not fit with that.
And the other reason is, by the time the thrust reversers were deployed, the left engine had already exploded. But to act as a blowtorch, the engine would have needed considerable exhaust.
We did calculations to confirm that the residual thrust from that engine would not have had the energy to have this effect. That confirmed that the thrust reversers couldn't actually have played any role, or significant role anyway, in the fire's severity.
Clearly, something other than the thrusters had caused the fire to spread so quickly. Prothero looks more closely at the data. After examining weather reports from the day of the accident, he finds the answer.
The wind was the main factor that determined the severity of the fire in terms of its attack on the outside of the aircraft, how rapidly it penetrated the aircraft, and it also affected the conditions inside the cabin.
Believing he had blown a tire, Captain Terrington made a fateful decision.
Stop it. 28 Mike, we are abandoning takeoff.
Well, when we heard the thud and we closed the throttles, it was my assumption that we were going to turn off the runway, clear the runway, ask air traffic for an engineer to come out and check the tyres.
Like a highway, an airport runway has a series of exits. Captain Terrington chose one called Link Delta.
But we've got a fire on number 1.
When we got the additional information of a fire warning, the brain was already programmed to carry out the stop.
The crew had been aware that they had a fire, but didn't really appreciate at the time the nature of the fire, the severity of the fire, so they had turned off the runway.
Captain Terrington turned his plane to the right and brought it to a stop. He couldn't have realized that doing so would make the problem far worse.
There was a crosswind, a slight crosswind, from the left side of the aircraft that was carrying the fire that was burning from the fuel that was pulled underneath the left wing. It carried that fire aft, rearwards, and took over and under the rear fuselage, in between the wing and the tailplane.
The wind wrapped the fire around the back of the plane and into the cabin.
If there'd been no wind at all, I think the situation would have been very much more benign.
Investigators have discovered how the fire started and the conditions that caused it to penetrate the cabin. Now investigator Ed Trimble must solve the biggest mystery surrounding the Manchester accident.
Here we had an aircraft which had aborted the takeoff for good reason. It had taxied off and stopped in a taxiway. in an expeditious manner, and yet 55 people had lost their lives. So there was a big question as to precisely why that had occurred.
Investigators learned that most of the dead were not found in the worst burned parts of the plane. Autopsies will point to the real killer on Flight 28. Of the 54 people who died in the cabin, only 6 had suffered serious burns. All the rest died from smoke inhalation. It seems the smoke in the cabin was particularly lethal. Survivors tell investigators that the smoke was unbearable.
The smoke was really black, and it was almost touching. It was really weird.
And they say the effect of that was shocking. Immediately you took one breath of the smoke, you began to feel debilitated, and you knew that if you took another breath or two, you weren't going to make it.
At the time of the Manchester accident, the effects of fire on an airplane had been well studied and understood, but the effects of smoke were not. To figure out what made the smoke so toxic, Trimble decides to recreate the fire that burned on Flight 28.
We were trying to model not only the gases which were produced, but also the kind of threat levels which were produced.
The smoke that filled the plane was from materials burning inside the cabin. The foam in the seats, the wool in the carpets, and the plastic overhead bins all release poisonous fumes. Those conditions are recreated by burning those same materials. Trimble discovers the passengers on Flight 28 inhaled smoke that contained a deadly blend of poisonous gases, including high levels of carbon monoxide and hydrogen cyanide. Now he desperately needs to find out if there's any way to protect airline passengers from that kind of smoke.
So it seemed to me pretty clear that unless we could protect people's respiratory systems from the assault from such combustion gases, there was little that we could do to improve survival chances from aircraft fires.
Over the course of 5 weeks, investigators run dozens of tests, experimenting with different filters. They burn nearly a quarter ton of material to create the necessary smoke. Their dramatic conclusion: it may have been possible to save passengers' lives.
There was not the slightest doubt in my mind that in these situations, in an aircraft cabin, if it is being assaulted by combustion gases, your chances of survival are vastly improved if you have smoke hood protection.
British Air Tours Flight 28 had only enough smoke hoods for the crew. They were never used. Trimble's research indicates that smoke hoods for passengers could have saved lives.
There were hoods available, both of the filter type and the breathable gas type, which can provide a very high level of protection to people in these circumstances.
Many of the passengers on Flight 28 would have survived with a few more minutes of breathing time.
It was in a blink of an eye, you know, from the time, you know, we stopped on the runway, you know, just within a few minutes, you know, it was all over, really.
A full Boeing 737 is designed to be evacuated in less than 2 minutes. So even without additional time, more of the passengers on Flight 28 should have been able to get off. To discover why so many people never made it off the plane, investigators turn to an unlikely source for the answer. By law, airplane manufacturers must prove their planes can be evacuated quickly and safely. When the 737 was introduced in the UK, Boeing demonstrated that 130 people could get off the plane in just 75 seconds.
All public transport aircraft are certificated to the same criteria, and that is that the total complement of passengers must be capable of evacuating from the aircraft using half the exits in the aircraft, it's generally one side or the other, within a maximum of 90 seconds.
But 90 seconds after Flight 28 came to a stop, most of the passengers were still on board.
The reason why the evacuation in Manchester wasn't achieved in 90 seconds is because the conditions in a real fire evacuation are completely different from the certification conditions.
The certification evacuation is conducted in clear conditions, with no smoke that reduces vision and overwhelms passengers. Within minutes of coming to a stop, Flight 28 filled with thick black smoke.
As soon as the smoke began to spill into the rear cabin and then flow forwards, essentially that induced immediate panic in those who were so affected by the smoke, because their respiration, I mean, the typical comment was, I took one breath of smoke and I felt as though my lungs were solidified. You can imagine under these conditions that people have got to get away from the smoke. And the people did this by basically clambering over the seats and other people in front of them.
In less than 5 minutes, what should have been a survivable accident turned deadly. To prevent future tragedies, Britain's Civil Aviation Authority decides to learn more about people. Helen Muir is a psychologist and a leading expert on how airplane design can influence survival. She's asked to study the behavior of passengers on Flight 28 to figure out why so many died.
What we had to learn to do was to design the aircraft interior so even if we had what we might say was dysfunctional behaviour in totality, we could accommodate the needs of individuals and their desperate rush to get out.
Muir configures a cabin to duplicate Flight 28 and fills it with volunteers. Then, to have them act as though the plane's on fire, she offers money to the first ones off.
And that produced behaviour that was quite unbelievable. People went over seats, they went round, past each other, all sorts of things. And indeed, when survivors from the actual Manchester accident came and saw the videos, they said, yeah, that's how it was.
The evacuation of Flight 28 was slowed by the fact that passengers became jammed in the bulkhead opening separating the main cabin from the galley. Investigators discover the logjam was created by the design of the Boeing 737. The bulkhead opening was 22.5 inches wide, just enough for one person to fit through.
But what they wanted to know was how much wider would they have to make it for people not to get stopped and blocked. We were trying to do as much as we could to recreate the situation which had happened at Manchester and then to systematically vary the aircraft interior to see what changes would improve the situation for passengers.
Muir's tests showed the narrow bulkhead opening created bottlenecks that flight attendants had to constantly clear. Increasing the width to 30 inches greatly improved the movement of passengers.
But we showed through repeat testing that if you changed the minimum gap from 20 to 30 inches, you would dramatically improve the speed at which people could get out, and you'd reduce the likelihood of people falling and slipping and so on.
As a result of Helen Muir's work, a recommendation was made to increase the space between the bulkhead walls to 30 inches and introduce strip lighting to help guide passengers to exits even when they are blinded by smoke. Muir also found a way to improve cabin safety without redesigning the cabin.
Please sit down.
She conducted research on the behavior of the cabin crew in emergencies and found that passengers get off a plane much faster with a highly assertive crew.
It's because we don't want people really making their own decisions. We want people to do exactly what the cabin crew or the procedures state, and we don't want people hesitating, particularly at the door.
Helen Muir's research prompted manufacturers to redesign cabins to make them safer. But one safety feature remains controversial: smoke hoods. Ed Trimble believes they should be mandatory on all commercial flights.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt.
Helen Muir is less convinced. She's studied how smoke hoods affect passenger behavior and is worried they would slow down the orderly evacuation of an airplane.
We know you've only got literally 1.5 to 2 minutes for everybody to get out. What we don't want to have is something which is difficult to put on, and so it slows people getting down.
The most important lesson of British Air Tours Flight 28 is that seconds matter. It's now universally accepted that it takes 90 seconds from the first sign of fire before it becomes unsurvivable. The passengers on Flight 28 lost valuable time when the starboard side door jammed. The investigators determined that the slide mechanism deployed too early, preventing the door from opening. There was a flaw that led the slide container's lid to jam if the door is opened too quickly. After the Manchester accident, Boeing quickly redesigned the system so that couldn't happen. But the recommendations made by the AAIB weren't adopted quickly enough to save lives 6 years later. In 1991, a Boeing 737 slammed into another plane on the runway in Los Angeles and caught fire. Many of the 22 people who died were overcome by smoke before they could get out. But in 2005, the crash of an Air France jet in Toronto showed how much has changed since the Manchester accident. All 309 people got off that plane in just 90 seconds. No one died. Some major changes to commercial airliners
All right, the door's open.
came about because of a flight that never left the ground.
And that's the only way I can resolve it, with the death of 55 of my passengers. The fact that flying is now safer.
I can't imagine anybody, you know, doesn't wish that it hadn't happened. You know, despite what's been learned and despite maybe the subsequent lives that have been changed, you know, you'd give anything for it not to have happened.
January 2008. The Boeing 777 is the gold standard for commercial aviation. For more than 10 years, the plane has logged 2 million flights without a single major accident.
Clear to land.
But less than 1,000 feet above London's Heathrow Airport, all that changed.
Hey, I can't get power on the engines.
What do you mean?
It's not giving me power.
This can't be happening. I thought if I don't do anything, then everybody will die.
Mayday! Mayday! Speedbird! Speedbird!
Whatever brought down one of the world's most technologically advanced airplanes can't be found at the crash site.
And they had the pilots, they had the passengers, they had the aircraft, they had everything there, except the thing that caused it. That had disappeared, as if by magic.
Mayday, Mayday.
British Airways Flight 38, a 10.5-hour journey from Beijing to London. Captain Peter Burkill has made this trip many times before.
I was operating that route a lot. It was one of my favourite flights because it was daylight. You could see the views the whole way along the route.
Burkill and First Officer John Coward both have thousands of hours flying the 777 under their belts.
It's a joy to fly. She handles really well. She's got modern equipment. The computers are easy to use. She's got the range, the ability to do short haul as efficiently as long haul.
For these two, as for many pilots, a day on the job consists of sitting in the cockpit for long hours as computers fly the plane. Powered by two massive Rolls-Royce engines, the Boeing 777 is one of the safest planes in the industry. Nick Harris is flying back to London after a business trip to China.
The good thing was it seemed to be that we were coming in early into Heathrow. I was looking forward to getting home to see the family.
Flight 38's destination is Heathrow Airport, one of the busiest international airports in the world. Nestled in the southwest corner of London, it's bordered by the A30 motorway. People who live in the nearby neighbourhood of Hounslow are well accustomed to the sound of jets taking off and landing. The area's tightly packed houses come into distant view for British Airways Flight 38. The autopilot is in control as the crew lines up with runway 27 left. As it nears the ground, the plane is buffeted by some high winds.
Just a little turbulence.
It's the first wrinkle in an otherwise smooth journey.
It's not me, that's the auto throttles doing their thing.
We were picking up wind gusts of about 20 to 30 knots, and we were fully aware that the auto throttles would be able to cope with that, so they'd be moving up and down quite a lot.
You might want to keep the autopilot on a little longer than usual, to let the wind calm down. Will do.
In turbulent weather, the autopilot can make faster adjustments to keep a plane level than the pilots. 1,200 feet above ground.
I'll have to turn that off for now, sir.
Sure.
Thank you.
2 minutes before landing, Coward takes over flying the plane.
You have control?
Just as the two pilots had planned.
I have control.
I had a few seconds to spare before clearance to landing, and I was just tidying up my map charts.
Speedbird 38, prepare to land 27 left.
Cleared to land 27 left, Speedbird 38.
I remember looking out to see if our gate was available.
500 feet. 500 feet.
Stable?
Well, sort of.
Suddenly, there's a problem.
Pete, I can't get power on the engines. It's not giving me power. What's going on?
What do you mean?
I was looking at the engine instruments, and they didn't make sense to me because we were asking for full power, but the engine instruments were not giving us any power at all.
What's going on?
What? Flight 38 is crippled in the worst way imaginable.
Well, it looks like we have double engine failure.
With neither engine providing enough power, the jet won't make it to the airport. With 152 people on board, Flight 38 is falling toward London with only seconds until it hits the ground.
This can't be happening. This is one of the most modern jets in the world.
In the cabin, there's no indication that anything's gone wrong.
On approach to land, everybody seemed relaxed in the cabin. We were just looking forward to landing.
Airspeed low, airspeed low, airspeed low.
And now I was looking at our impact point. I could see a set of buildings around the Hatton Cross area and a petrol station. I just knew if we were hitting those, then it was certain 100% fatalities. At that point, I felt the weight of my 4 bars on my shoulder. I am the captain. If I don't do anything, then everybody will die.
This close to the ground, Burkill doesn't have many options. He could take back control of the plane from Coward, but doesn't think that's the right move.
First decision really was to not take control. I remember looking over at John. He was still flying the plane well. Good, he's doing a good job. He's doing what I need him to do.
Burkill knows that even if they manage to clear Hounslow, the jet could still smash into the busy A30 motorway or the antennas at the edge of the airport.
I thought about raising the gear. That's the biggest drag on a commercial jet. But I needed the gear to crash on. We were going to impact, and that was going to take the brunt of the impact, so I had to leave the gear down.
With a crash imminent, Burkill has only one move left, but it comes with enormous risk.
I knew I had about 15 seconds to make a huge decision. I needed to get past those buildings. It was obvious to me that I needed to raise the flaps.
Retracting the flaps will reduce drag, but also lift. The plane will fly further, but drop faster. Burkill must determine which is more important.
I wanted to discuss it with the crew, but this was all in a matter of seconds. I remember holding that lever for a fraction of a second.
He hopes this move will help his plane avoid catastrophe.
The effect was immediate.
Now Burkill makes the announcement every pilot dreads.
Mayday! Mayday! Speedbird! Speedbird!
It was hard, very hard. I remember the couple of impacts and the noise.
Good God. The landing was hard. Just a huge bang. The noise, bits falling off the ceiling.
Then I also became a passenger because we were now in an uncontrolled aeroplane. We were sliding along the ground, and I didn't know what we were going to hit next. And then I thought about my wife and kids, and I said goodbye to them.
The lights went out.
I could hear the wreckage breaking up. And then we stopped. When we actually stopped, I was surprised that I was still there. And then I looked round the flight deck and I was more surprised to see that all 3 of us were unscarred.
Everybody stay seated with your seatbelts fastened!
And I quickly became the captain again.
The crew switches off the fuel,
APU fire switch.
hydraulic and electrical systems.
Control switches. Cut. Checklist complete.
I then had to look after my survivors. I thought 20% were dead because this aircraft was broken up.
This is an emergency. Evacuate. Evacuate.
The air stewardess then took control completely. As she opened the door, I smelt the fuel.
We should hurry.
And realized that we need to get off this aircraft.
The big danger now is fire. Having survived the landing, passengers could be killed if flames sweep through the jet.
Jump! Jump!
I left all my luggage and just got myself down the slide.
Jump!
Let's get out of here.
I went through the galley and checked the right-hand aisle, and I was surprised to see nobody there.
Despite Burkill's fears, there are no casualties. Outside in the cool January air, the scale of the disaster is clear.
The right wheel had actually been ripped off during the impact. The engines were just sad. They were all ripped apart. The cowlings were ripped off, and the engines were half buried. It wasn't an aircraft anymore.
I now start to realize that we've been involved in a major accident. I saw the damage to the undercarriage and to the wing.
The plane narrowly missed the A-30 and the antennas at the foot of the runway.
It could have been total devastation. If the impact had been on anything other than soft mud and grass, the likelihood of a fire was immense.
Given the amount of damage, it's incredible that only 47 people were injured.
I felt quite lucky that I was still alive. It was quite a surreal feeling.
From China, British Prime Minister Gordon Brown praises Burkill and the crew.
I think it's right to pay tribute to the calmness and professionalism of the British Airways staff, the captain, Peter Burkill, for what he achieved in engineering a landing that protected lives.
Investigators have some early hunches about what caused the engines to fail. They also have plenty of clues, but a key piece of evidence is already missing.
Heathrow's emergency planning swung into action.
The crash of British Airways Flight 38 dominates the news. It's the most serious accident at Heathrow in 30 years.
Heathrow Airport is a very busy airport. It is the main airport in the UK, so anything that happens in Heathrow Airport immediately hits the media.
More significantly, the 777 is one of the world's most modern and reliable jets. The accident unsettles the airline industry.
The 777 is as safe as an airplane can be. It had such a superb safety record. What on earth happened? You don't like not knowing whether it might happen to the rest of your fleet.
Investigators quickly arrive on the scene. Phil Slight is the lead engineer for Britain's AAIB, the Air Accidents Investigation Branch.
When you first approach an accident site like this, the first thought you've got is, where do I start? The plane landed about 1,000 feet short of the runway. The landing gears pushed up through the wings. The nose landing gear collapsed.
Just hours after the crash, investigators interview the crew. Captain Peter Burkill has a first-hand account of what happened.
I think I wanted to talk about it because I knew of the innocence of the whole crew.
This isn't our fault. We didn't do anything wrong. But the engines weren't giving us any more power.
Well, it looks like we have double engine failure.
We tried to give them more power manually, but there was nothing.
Burkill explains that something had caused both of the jet's Rolls-Royce engines to roll back at the same time, robbing the aircraft of power.
Acceleration on both.
When you hear something of a double engine failure, you start looking at what's common. What could cause both engines to fail at the same time? So our first thoughts were that it may have run out of fuel.
A fuel shortage is rare, but it has happened before. In 1983, a Boeing 767 ran out of fuel flying over central Canada. A mistake in converting between metric and imperial measurements left the plane with much less fuel than the crew thought. At 26,000 feet, they lost power to both engines. The captain was able to glide the plane to a safe landing at an abandoned airbase. In the case of Flight 38, this theory is immediately questioned.
Jet fuel has a certain odor. Anyone who has worked with an aircraft will know the distinctive smell of Jet A1 fuel. There was certainly a lot of fuel leaking from the aircraft, from the ruptures to the bottom of the engines when we arrived on site.
A check of the plane's dipsticks confirms 2 of the tanks did in fact have fuel.
So we knew that there was plenty of fuel on board this aircraft to complete the flight.
There remains several other possible explanations for such a loss of power, and investigators must tackle them all. There is great confidence that the mystery can be solved, as any and every piece of evidence investigators could ever want is readily available. They have access to the pilot, the crew, and most importantly, the entire plane.
We were quite fortunate to have the amount of data that we had on this aircraft. Because the aircraft remained intact, we were able to interrogate lots of computers and also get lots of data from the recorders. Additionally, we had data external to the aircraft, such as radar data, and also the radio transmissions as well.
Mark Ford retrieves the plane's flight data recorders, which promised to give investigators important clues. He has another resource, the QAR, or Quick Access Recorder. While the black boxes are in the rear of the plane, the QAR is a data recorder in the front, used mainly for diagnostics.
It does have an advantage over the flight recorder, though, in that it has a greater memory capacity and can record additional parameters over and above those available on the flight recorder. You can recover the data from a quick access recorder within a matter of minutes in some cases.
Speed, altitude, control settings, cockpit conversations. In all, the various recorders have preserved 1,400 different pieces of data, which should help the investigators close the case. But when they study the QAR, what they find is chilling.
The quick access recorder data stopped about 45 seconds prior to the accident itself. Initial thoughts were that there was an electrical problem, possibly that had affected not only the QAR, but possibly the engines as well.
The 777 is one of the latest advances to computer-assisted airplanes. Pilots don't directly control the plane. Instead, their inputs are sent to a computer. Those signals are then relayed to the engines, flaps, and other systems on the aircraft.
Pete, I can't get power on the engines.
A massive failure of the plane's information systems could explain why the engines stopped working. Perhaps the computers that control them froze. Farnborough is home to the AAIB. The flight data recorder has been sent here for analysis. An electrical problem would be recorded on this device. But interpreting the information will take some time. Time investigators don't have. There are hundreds of 777s landing every day. They need to find answers before whatever brought down Flight 38 strikes again. While they wait, authorities turn their attention to the fuel recovered from the ruined plane. A bad batch of fuel could have deprived the aircraft of power just when it needed it most.
Well, fuel can be contaminated in many different ways. It can be particle contamination, it can be biological contamination, and they can get into filters to restrict the flow.
We took several samples from various points within the fuel system, so not only from the fuel tank itself, but also from remnants within fuel lines and also within various fuel components.
We managed to trace the fuel back through the documentation to a shipment of Jet A1, which came from South Korea. And that was shipped across in a tanker to China and was then transported by pipeline to Beijing Airport. We compared it with over 1,200 other batches of fuel in the UK, and it came out to be very good.
Investigators next consider the possibility of a blockage in the fuel tanks. They discover some bizarre evidence. Several small pieces of tape are recovered, along with something else.
When we were in the fuel tanks, we did find a few small articles. One of them was a red scraper.
The items were likely left over from when the plane was built 7 years ago. But while they're peculiar, there's no indication that any of them played a role in bringing down the plane.
Obviously, it's not ideal to find anything within a fuel tank. We obviously looked to see whether this would have had an effect on the fuel flow to the engines. The items were so small, they would not have caused a restriction.
As the search for answers continues, a puzzling find surfaces. Less than 3 years before the Heathrow crash, another 777 suffered a serious mid-air problem. After taking off in Perth, Australia, a Malaysian passenger jet was climbing through 38,000 feet when suddenly the plane's autopilot pitched the nose up and climbed steeply. Calamity was only averted when the pilot took manual control of the jet.
They did manage to get it safely back to base. The investigators established that this was a computer problem.
British aviation authorities consider that the electronic brain of one of the world's most reliable jets might be faulty.
The Malaysian Airlines aircraft was really quite an unnerving one. The investigators sort of pulled out the files on it and started looking over it to try and get some clues.
Did we have a problem with the electronic control system causing the engines to roll back?
If flaws are found with Flight 38's computers, it means 777s around the world could all be disasters in the making. This thought hangs heavily over the industry. When the readout of the plane's flight data recorder is conducted in Farnborough, investigators learn that the crash could have been much worse.
There was very little they could actually have done.
It looks like we have double engine failure.
There was only 30 seconds between when they were fully aware of what was going on.
Airspeed low.
And the accident was inevitable.
Records show that soon after the engines failed, the plane started falling faster than 1,800 feet a minute, a very steep descent. But lack of power was only one factor working against the crew. They had extended their flaps on descent. It helps control the plane at lower speeds by increasing lift, but the extended flaps create drag, which slows the plane down. It takes more power to keep the plane flying with a wider wing.
Airspeed low.
I needed to raise the flaps. I knew that by raising it 1 notch to flap 25 would be the right thing to do. To reduce the drag, that's what I had to do.
Now, what he did here gave them a few extra feet.
Had the flaps been left at flaps 30, the aircraft would have struck the ground just before a set of ILS antennas.
The plane then would have slammed into the antennas, sustaining even more damage and increasing the chances of serious injuries. For their efforts, Burkill and his team are considered heroes.
Flying is about teamwork, and we had an outstanding team. The evacuation.
There is no doubt. Without the flight crew's actions, Flight 38's landing would have been a catastrophe.
Now, the recordings
As they continue examining data from the flight data recorders,
continue right until the moment of impact.
investigators are no closer to solving the case.
Analysis of the flight recorder didn't identify any particular fault with the aircraft electrical system that would have resulted in both engines rolling back.
They are at least able to determine why no data was found on the quick access recorder for the last 45 seconds of the flight. It's not an electrical fault as they first feared.
The 45-second delay in the QAR recording was a result of the fact that the QAR doesn't record in real time. It buffers the data and then will record approximately 45 seconds later.
With all the information from the plane's various data recorders now collected, investigators have a precise picture of what happened. The jet was on the proper course as it made its approach to land, when things went horribly wrong.
At 720 feet, the right engine rolled back. 7 seconds later, the left engine rolled back. The autothrottle attempted to command greater thrust.
It's not me, that's the autothrottle.
But the engines didn't respond.
I can't get power on the engines.
While electrical and computer problems are ruled out as causes of the crash, the flight data recorders do point investigators to the likely source of the problem.
The two most significant parameters from the quick access recorder were the fuel metering valves. Both those valves indicated that they had opened to their fully open position.
The plane's computers were calling for as much fuel from the tanks as possible. The valves were fully open, but not nearly enough fuel was reaching the engines. A plane with plenty of fuel and a working computer system still crash-landed, and investigators can't determine why. They focus on the weather on the day of the accident.
It was a very cold air mass over Siberia, so we were aware of the cold conditions, but the flight was expected to be smooth and also quick.
The plane's path took them high over Russia. The outside temperature went as low as -74 degrees centigrade. It's a potentially dangerous temperature if not monitored closely.
In cold air masses, you have to be very aware of the fuel temperatures.
When fuel starts to freeze, it produces wax. As the fuel temperature drops, the wax becomes greater within the fuel itself until it comes to a point where it can no longer flow.
We have a fuel temperature gauge on the flight deck, which is monitored at all times, and I personally look at that every time I do a fuel check, which minimum is once an hour. Basically, you don't want to get it below minus 34 degrees centigrade.
While they were cold, the temperatures never dipped into the danger zone where the fuel could wax and clog the system. And the fuel temperature increased significantly as the jet approached London.
We were coming through 20,000 feet, and I remember seeing minus 20 degrees centigrade, so it had already started to warm up.
Another potential cause of the crash is ruled out. Investigators are now running out of possible explanations.
And the expectation from the media, and also from aviation experts, was that we would have the answer within days.
But there was no comment today about the ongoing investigation.
It very quickly became apparent that that would not be the case.
They had the pilots, they had the passengers, they had the aircraft, they had everything there, except the thing that caused it. That had disappeared, as if by magic.
Despite mountains of data and physical evidence at their disposal, investigators are still unable to say what caused the crash of a British Airways 777 at Heathrow Airport. They turn to a failure of the fuel delivery system as a culprit. To prove it was responsible, they need to pinpoint anything out of the ordinary about Flight 38's journey on January the 17th, 2008.
It's a daily flight operating from Beijing to Heathrow. We wanted to work out what was unique about this flight. Why this flight in particular?
If you've got a very puzzling incident, like the 777 accident at Heathrow, you're going to mine all the data you can.
Just put them over there for now.
So we approached many operators to obtain some data of previous flights so that we could then do a comparison.
Flight data is collected from companies around the world.
And we had something like 144,000 flights in all.
But it will take months of work to analyze this enormous volume of information. To study Flight 38's fuel system more closely, huge sections of it are brought to the AAIB hangar and reassembled.
It allowed us to basically just sit there and look at it and to brainstorm and come up with ideas as to what might have caused it.
McDermott and his team consider all possibilities, from design flaws to a malfunction specific to this aircraft. The examination comes up empty.
We carried out an exhaustive and very thorough inspection and testing of the fuel system, and we find nothing wrong.
Frustrated, investigators are at a dead end.
We kept going through this cycle. We kept going back over what we'd done before. Had we missed something? And every time we went back over, we kept coming back to no.
There was no trouble with the plane's computers. It had plenty of fuel. And no problems with the fuel itself. But somehow, when it was most vital,
Mayday!
The engines didn't get the fuel they needed. The AAIB detectives have run out of suspects.
There was no clear explanation. Nothing that you'd seen before.
It's not giving me that.
In any airplane, let alone the 777, could have explained this.
Now they turn away from the clues they have to those they don't.
Phil started coming out of a mantra, which was a quote from Sherlock Holmes.
Whatever is left, however improbable, must be the cause.
Has to be.
In this case, we always kept coming back to what's there, what could have been there that's not there now. And we come back to ice.
Suspicion that the cause of the accident was ice grew stronger and stronger.
But investigators are faced with a nearly impossible task. How can they prove that ice had brought down the plane when the evidence they need would have melted by the time they arrived? 3 months after the crash, Brian McDermott flies to Seattle to work with engineers at Boeing, the company that built the 777. If ice brought down Flight 38, they need to prove how and why.
We took the pipes from the right side of the fuel system, and those pipes and those couplings were used on the test rig at Boeing.
Ice in the fuel lines has long been a concern for jets of all kinds. But decades ago, engineers found an ingenious way to deal with the ice forming in the fuel of passenger jets. The heart of the system is the fuel oil heat exchanger, or FOHE. Cold fuel runs through thin tubes, which are surrounded by the hot oil used to lubricate the engines.
The purpose of a fuel heater is to heat the fuel up to prevent icing of the delicate fuel control system.
The FOHE is designed to prevent exactly the problem investigators suspect crippled Flight 38. But it's also a potential bottleneck in the system.
During the fuel testing, we were looking to establish where we could get a restriction that would restrict the fuel flow to 6,000 pounds per hour. And the only place that we could get such a restriction occurring was on the face of the fuel oil heat exchanger.
Investigators have to prove 3 things. First, that substantial amounts of ice can accumulate inside the fuel pipes. Second, that the ice can suddenly be released. And finally, prove that it can block a device specifically designed to melt it.
We use different methods of controlling the environment around the pipes that range from dry ice to cold fuel and to hot air to simulate the environment around the pipes that the aircraft experienced during the flight.
After each fuel cooling test, investigators look inside the pipes for ice. But they can never get much ice to form, let alone block the fuel lines.
And the fuel temperature was minus 30 degrees centigrade. Very little ice would stick to the inside of the fuel pipes.
Investigators know the temperature on the accident flight didn't get much colder. So how had the ice formed?
We still hadn't answered the question of where does the ice come from in the first place? And indeed, was it ice? Or was there something else that we've missed?
Surprisingly, when the fuel temperatures are warmer, the breakthrough arrives.
If you have water in the fuel, then that water will freeze and form ice crystals. And then when the temperature gets to about minus 20 degrees centigrade, then those ice crystals will start to stick together and will also stick to the inside of the pipes.
Below minus 20, any ice crystals in the fuel are too cold to attach to the pipes. But in the sticky range, between minus 20 and minus 8 centigrade, slushy ice forms and sticks to the sides of the fuel pipes.
So when we demonstrated that ice could actually build up and grow onto the walls of the fuel pipes, there was a certain amount of surprise as to how much could actually grow.
Now we're getting somewhere.
Well, the question for us at this stage was, how could that ice come off the pipes?
Investigators think they have the smoking gun. But they still can't prove how a small bit of ice could bring down a $200 million plane. They continue analyzing thousands of comparative flights to see what made Flight 38 unique. But after 7 months, they still can't crack the case.
From 35,000 Rolls-Royce powered flights, it was less than 1% that had the same features as the accident flight.
Then, on November the 26th, 2008, more than 10 months after the crash, the importance of finding an answer is underscored when the elusive culprit strikes again. Another 777 runs into trouble 39,000 feet above the United States, when one of its engines simply stops working.
Fortunately, in that case, the engine recovered and the aircraft landed safely at Atlanta.
Even though it didn't result in an accident, it reinforces concerns that there's a potentially dangerous flaw on every 777 around the world. The incident captures the attention of the British Airways crash investigators.
The Delta Shanghai flight really was investigated with huge interest. The engines were Rolls-Royce engines of the same type. So they immediately went looking for evidence of the same problem.
And in fact, they do find important similarities between the Delta airliner and British Airways Flight 38.
The aircraft had operated a long sector from Shanghai in China to Atlanta. The fuel temperatures were within the sticky range that we had defined during the research. We were able to see that the reaction of the engine was very similar to that of the 777 at Heathrow.
Later examination of the Delta flight shows no evidence of any electronic, mechanical, or fuel system problems, strongly suggesting that the culprit was indeed ice.
When we heard about the Delta flight, we were more convinced than ever that we were on the right track.
McDermott and the investigators at Boeing in Seattle continue their testing. It's been a year since the accident, and the problem hasn't been found or fixed. They've run hundreds of simulations and spent millions of dollars. They still can't get the ice in the fuel lines to clog the fuel oil heat exchanger and cause the kind of blockage that brought down Flight 38.
We came to a stage where we had not actually come up with what had caused this accident. At this time, the media and also the general public, there was a bit of unrest as to why we had not yet come up with an answer.
Industry pressure to resolve this case is intensifying. Investigators still need to know what made Flight 38 different from thousands of others that had flown under similar conditions. To find out, they retrace every moment of Flight 38's journey. The voyage from Beijing involved a gradual climb, a steady cruise, and a gradual descent. The fuel temperatures fell and rose accordingly, causing ice to accumulate in the fuel lines. That ice posed no danger unless it was released. Now investigators study the fuel flow and find that it was kept steady for most of the flight. The autopilot maintained constant speed and low power for hours, never demanding an abrupt increase in engine power until just before they reached the runway.
The approach into Heathrow was quite a turbulent approach, and the engines were demanding various levels of thrust power.
It's not me, that's the auto throttles doing their thing.
And there were 4 changes in fuel flow, one of which was a very high fuel flow of around about 12 to 13,000 pounds per hour demanded.
A closer review of the American Delta flight reveals that its engine rolled back under the same circumstances, a sudden demand for power after a long period of consistent speed. Investigators are now set to duplicate these precise conditions. They hope that by reproducing the moments just before landing, which was the only part of the flight where the crew suddenly required more power, they may finally get the answer they're looking for.
The problem that we were looking at is very, very difficult to replicate. And during what was one of the last tests, we actually managed to get all the elements together.
After simulating running engines at constant speed, investigators increased the power.
We allowed the ice to accumulate for 3 hours, and then the flow rate was increased.
What happens next breaks the case wide open. In Boeing's Seattle lab, investigators' sudden demand for more engine power causes the fuel pressure downstream of the fuel oil heat exchanger to drop dramatically. And when investigators examine this vital component,
we then saw that ice had formed across the face of it.
soft ice that had formed deep inside the fuel lines broke free when the pressure was abruptly increased. It restricted the flow of fuel to the engines. Investigators have finally found the Achilles heel hidden deep inside the 777. The tubes that bring the fuel through the FOHE jut out just above the container of hot oil. It's just a few millimeters, but was enough to prevent the ice from coming in contact with the hot surface below and melting.
Now, the ice doesn't totally restrict the fuel flowing through it. It has some porosity, so the fuel will continue to flow through. But the flow rate is much lower than it should be.
In all of the tests, only one gave investigators the result they were looking for, the one that exactly matched the journey of Flight 38. While the plane flew over Russia, water in the fuel turned to ice. At -20, it began to build up along the inside of the pipes. The steady speed of the aircraft ensured this accumulation was never interrupted. Then, as the plane approached Heathrow, turbulence resulted in the first demand for power since much earlier in the flight, and things cascaded into a serious problem.
Doing their thing. You might want to keep the autopilot on a little longer than usual.
The gushing fuel washed the ice through the fuel system until it built up against the face of the FOHE, with disastrous results.
Pete, I can't get power on the engines. It's not giving me power.
Facing a threat no one knew existed,
Mayday! Speedbird!
the pilots didn't have a chance to solve the problem. But why had the American Delta crew been able to clear the blockage, while the British Airways flight ended in near catastrophe? It's discovered that after just a few seconds of reducing engine power to idle, the blockage in the FOHE clears. But this maneuver was not available to the British Airways pilots because they were so close to the ground. Soon after the Seattle tests, Rolls-Royce redesigned the fuel oil heat exchanger.
So what Rolls-Royce did was to actually remove those protruding tubes, so you now have a flush face.
And they found that if they flattened this surface, even if ice crystals did form in the fuel, they'd go straight down the holes in the block. Very, very easy fix.
Other aircraft manufacturers are ordered to ensure that their systems aren't vulnerable to the same problem. Peter Burkill, John Coward, and the rest of the crew of Flight 38 received the British Airways Safety Medal for their performance during the accident. It's the company's highest honor.
Crew have been presented with an unprecedented failure, and they did the best they could in the time that they had available.
The crew did as good a job as they could, and since they really only had about 30 seconds to think about what they were going to do about this, they couldn't have done any better than they did.
The ice that brought down one of the world's most sophisticated airplanes was gone by the time investigators showed up.
Weird thing about this investigation was that the culprit had fled the scene.
The inquiry into what happened consumed thousands of hours of manpower and cost millions of dollars.
These people really pulled out the stops to find out. And the reason? We have to know.
With unrelenting diligence and a little inspiration from Sherlock Holmes, the mystery was finally solved.
Whatever is left, however improbable, must be the cause.